Hello, curious people. Today I am here to help you. I know you are using this video to help you fall asleep. So before you like this video and subscribe to the channel, tell me where you are from and what time you are watching. Make yourself comfortable. Now I stepped into the stories. I have this story my sister told me when we were a lot younger that just randomly resurfaced when I was talking to a friend, and I feel like I should have made a bigger deal about it as a kid. When I was around 12, I was talking with my sister, who was about 7 at the time, about the scary staircase that was in a house we used to live in. At night, my parents would turn off all the lights downstairs before heading to bed, but we kept the upstairs hallway light on, so the stairs basically plunged into pure darkness. My sister had nightmares a lot as a kid, so it wasn't completely unheard of for her to head down the stairs to our parents' room in the middle of the night. I remember saying something to her like, "Yeah, I always used to get scared someone would be down there at night or something," to which my sister casually nodded and said, "Well, a man used to visit me down there. I felt a chill go down my body, and I just remember feeling so unsettled by how calmly she had admitted it." I asked her more about it, to which she went into full detail about the man. He came in through our back sliding glass door and wore a black cloak with a mask over his mouth and nose. My sister said she remembered him telling her not to be scared. He had a knife that he showed her, which she described as looked like it needed to be cleaned. Then he'd just slip back out and leave. He'd shown up multiple nights, according to her, and went further into the house every time, closer to the stairs, waiting for her. We moved a couple months after she claimed it. All happened. So if something were to have happened, I guess I'll never know. I'd immediately squashed the fire after she'd told me, basically demanding for my own peace of mind that it was just a dream or that she was only trying to scare me. But she was so adamant that it really had happened. She wasn't really an imaginative kid, and she was notorious for only ever telling the truth, getting me in trouble more times than I'd like to admit. So I really feel irked that this could be real. Our back door lock was really tedious, so it makes sense that that's how the alleged man was coming inside. Our dog and cat slept in my parents' room, so it's not like we had a good alert, and we lived off of an old highway, so cars were driving by at every hour of the day. But then there's the other side. She was infamous for having nightmares a lot, so it easily could have just been some kind of recurring dream, and I never understood why she was just so chill about it all. I never will. I stepped in a bear trap in the woods, and now someone might kill me. I'm currently in an immense amount of pain as I write this. My leg is stuck in a bear trap, and the trap's teeth are digging into my shin. This is the most intense pain I have ever experienced in my life. I may never be able to use my left leg again, but that's currently the least of my concerns. I left my apartment around 10 p.m. I just moved in here and hadn't yet explored the woods. I'm the type of guy who really enjoys night walks, so I took my flashlight and pocket knife and headed out. Around 45 minutes into my walk, the trail that I was on, theoretically, ended. The reason I say theoretically is because there was a private property, do not enter sign. Who in the world has private property 2 miles deep into the woods? I have to be completely honest. When I say this, I make risky and stupid decisions sometimes. Growing up, my friends and I would sneak onto all kinds of private property, whether it was old factories, schools, malls, or things of that nature. Seeing as I thought this was just a piece of land deep in the woods, I honestly continued without any hesitation. I walked for what must have been about 15 more minutes when, all of a sudden, I reached a clearing. The grass was tall and thick, growing up to my waist. It had clearly not been cut in years. As I shone my flashlight around the clearing, I noticed that there was a small path that had been trodden through the grass. When I raised my flashlight to see where the path led, I illuminated a small cabin. The cabin was barely visible since I was about 75 yards away, and my flashlight is pretty weak. Why in the world would someone build a cabin all the way out here? At this point, I had two options. I could either walk toward the small cabin to see what was inside, or I would have to turn back. After walking for what was now about an hour, I decided there was no way in hell I would leave without checking out that cabin. I started walking toward the cabin through the path when, all of a sudden, my phone received an amber alert. The high-pitched screech startled me, and I stopped in my tracks. The alert rang out for about 3 seconds until I was finally able to silence it. Even though the sound had ceased, my heart was racing a mile a minute. At this point, I was about 15 yards away from the cabin and just standing still when, all of a sudden, a light turned on. Hello, curious people. Today I am here to help you. I know you are using this video to help you fall asleep. So, before you like this video and subscribe to the channel, tell me where you are from and what time you are watching. Make yourself comfortable. Now I stepped into the stories. I have this story my sister told me when we were a lot younger that just randomly resurfaced when I was talking to a friend, and I feel like I should have made a bigger deal about it as a kid. When I was around 12, I was talking with my sister, who was about 7 at the time, about the scary staircase that was in a house we used to live in. At night, my parents would turn off all the lights downstairs before heading to bed, but we kept the upstairs hallway light on, so the stairs basically plunged into pure darkness. My sister had nightmares a lot as a kid, so it wasn't completely unheard of for her to head down the stairs to our parents' room in the middle of the night. I remember saying something to her like, "Yeah, I always used to get scared someone would be down there at night or something," to which my sister casually nodded and said, "Well, a man used to visit me down there." I felt a chill go down my body, and I just remember feeling so unsettled by how calmly she had admitted it. I asked her more about it, to which she went into full detail about the man. He came in through our back sliding glass door and wore a black cloak with a mask over his mouth and nose. My sister said she remembered him telling her not to be scared. He had a knife that he showed her, which she described as looked like it needed to be cleaned. Then he'd just slip back out and leave. He'd shown up multiple nights, according to her, and went further into the house every time, closer to the stairs, waiting for her. We moved a couple months after she claimed it. All happened, so if something were to have happened, I guess I'll never know. I'd immediately squashed the fire after she'd told me, basically demanding for my own peace of mind that it was just a dream, or that she was only trying to scare me. But she was so adamant that it really had happened. She wasn't really an imaginative kid, and she was notorious for only ever telling the truth, getting me in trouble more times than I'd like to admit. So, I really feel irked that this could be real. Our back door lock was really tedious, so it makes sense that that's how the alleged man was coming inside. Our dog and cat slept in my parents' room, so it's not like we had a good alert, and we lived off of an old highway, so cars were driving by at every hour of the day. But then there's the other side. She was infamous for having nightmares a lot, so it easily could have just been some kind of recurring dream, and I never understood why she was just so chill about it all. I never will. I stepped in a bear trap in the woods, and now someone might kill me. I'm currently in an immense amount of pain as I write this. My leg is stuck in a bear trap, and the trap's teeth are digging into my shin. This is the most intense pain I have ever experienced in my life. I may never be able to use my left leg again, but that's currently the least of my concerns. I left my apartment around 10 p.m. I just moved in here and hadn't yet explored the woods. I'm the type of guy who really enjoys night walks, so I took my flashlight and pocket knife and headed out. Around 45 minutes into my walk, the trail that I was on theoretically ended. The reason I say theoretically is because there was a private property, do not enter sign. Who in the world has private property 2 miles deep into the woods? I have to be completely honest. When I say this, I make risky and stupid decisions sometimes. Growing up, my friends and I would sneak onto all kinds of private property, whether it was old factories, schools, malls, or things of that nature. Seeing as I thought this was just a piece of land deep in the woods, I honestly continued without any hesitation. I walked for what must have been about 15 more minutes, when all of a sudden, I reached a clearing. The grass was tall and thick, growing up to my waist. It had clearly not been cut in years. As I shone my flashlight around the clearing, I noticed that there was a small path that had been trodden through the grass. When I raised my flashlight to see where the path led, I illuminated a small cabin. The cabin was barely visible since I was about 75 yards away, and my flashlight is pretty weak. Why in the world would someone build a cabin all the way out here? At this point, I had two options. I could either walk toward the small cabin to see what was inside, or I would have to turn back. After walking for what was now about an hour, I decided there was no way in hell I would leave without checking out that cabin. I started walking toward the cabin through the path when, all of a sudden, my phone received an Amber Alert. The high-pitched screech startled me, and I stopped. It was a bitterly cold January night, the kind where the world feels suspended in time, cloaked in silence and shadows. I was walking home, my footsteps echoing eerily on the empty street. Something about the night felt wrong, though I couldn't quite place why. It was the sort of feeling that tightens your chest, as if the air itself is watching you. As I approached an old bench beneath a flickering street lamp, I noticed a man sitting there. He was hunched over, clutching a cane, his silhouette barely illuminated by the failing light. His coat was tattered, and his hat cast a deep shadow over his face. The sight of him unsettled me, though I couldn't explain why. I hesitated, but felt compelled to speak. "Sir, are you all right? It's freezing out here." The man slowly lifted his head, and the light caught his face. My stomach dropped. His features were worn, etched with wrinkles, but I knew them. knew them because they were mine. His eyes, those sharp, weary eyes, stared straight into me. "What the hell?" I whispered, taking a step back. He smiled faintly, a sad, knowing smile. "It's strange, isn't it, seeing yourself like this?" I froze, my mind racing. This had to be a joke, a trick. "Who are you?" I demanded, though my voice betrayed my fear. "You already know," he said simply. "No, no, this isn't possible," I stammered, my breath fogging in the icy air. He sighed, leaning on his cane. I didn't believe it either. But here we are. I wanted to run, to get as far away from this impossible encounter as I could. But something about his presence held me there, rooted in place. "What do you want from me?" I asked, my voice trembling. "To warn you," he said, his tone grave. "You're standing on the edge of a cliff, and you don't even see it. The choices you're making, the way you're living, it leads to nothing but regret." I swallowed hard, the words cutting deeper than I wanted to admit. "What do you mean?" He stared at me, his expression unreadable. "You're wasting time. You tell yourself you'll do better tomorrow, that there's always more time. But there isn't. You'll keep putting off what matters. Friends, love, your dreams, until it's too late. And one day, you'll wake up alone, wondering how it all slipped away." The world seemed to tilt as his words hit me like a physical blow. I don't understand. What do I do?" His voice grew sharper, almost desperate. "Stop waiting. Stop being afraid. Fix what's broken before it breaks you. Fight for the life you want before you end up like me." The air around us seemed to grow colder, the shadows darker. "How do I know you're real?" I asked, my voice barely audible. The old man tilted his head, his eyes gleaming with something like pity. "You'll know soon enough." Before I could respond, a sharp gust of wind swept through the street, and when I blinked, he was gone. I stood there, my heart hammering, staring at the empty bench, and then I saw it, scratched into the wooden slats. The words, "Don't become me, change your fate." My breath hitched as I realized there was more. Below the words were my initials, and a date that was only 3 years away. "Help me identify my cattle killer." "Hi everyone, I'm new to the whole Reddit thing, but I thought I might as well give it a try. I need help. I need someone to give me some form of understanding. Recently, I've earned a job at a local ranch. I work as a cowboy in just about every sense, from boots to my hat to my jeans and revolver on my hip. Even ride a horse. But that bastard hates me, so I do my best to avoid her. Still, I do my job to the fullest. I used to break broncos and tag heads of cattle, but recently I've been moved to the position of a night watcher. To begin, I figured working as a cattle rustler or cowpuncher would be like the Marty Robbins songs, you know, nightly songs around the campfire, thinking of the girl you left behind, being honest and courageous to anything. Most of it is wrong. Most of my time, as of recent, is in solidarity and silence, the breaks of the nothingness being few and far between. The western wasteland managed to whisper to you in the languages of cattle moves, bird song, cicada cries, and howling wind. The days showed how vast and empty the land was, while the nights showed that same world coated in inky black and growing darkness, which fought against the glow of my battery-powered lanterns. I guess Marty was also right about them. The nights are often cold, and they are bitter, more so than heartbreak, but recently they've become terrifying. I was always warned about being a night watcher. The job was how it sounded. I would stay up and watch the cattle while they roamed the fields, making sure that no predator could reach them. It's boring. Beyond a doubt, it is boring. Yet before I really started, the old men would warn about all manner of things and tell the tallest of stories. I figured it was for people like me, meant to scare greenhorns. I reached into my pocket to get my phone out. I called the police to report everything. I knew they wouldn't believe me. I knew they'd call me crazy. As I was on the phone with the operator, I saw the beast, a flicker of it. I saw blackened skin that shined like a crystal. I saw 6 legs and enough eyes to make a spider jealous. It was the size of a pickup truck, muscled all over. It was on the roof of our big house, standing on the roof as if lording over the ranch. It leapt away, the charge calling out, as it ran further and further from the approaching sirens. That's my recollection of events. It's what I saw and what I remember. I tried to explain it to people I knew. I tried to help universities understand, but there isn't anyone. There's no expert, no religious connection. There's nothing, and I feel like nothing. Maybe you guys can help me out. Maybe you can explain it. Maybe I can finally be told that I'm just crazy. I don't know. I need something other than nothing. The summer camp we went to turned out to be a human hunting reserve. My name is Emma, and it's been 6 years since I last shared my story. No one believed me, but I was there. I saw what happened, what they did to us. I'll never forgive them. I'll divide the text into 2 fonts. The plain text is the testimony of my experience, while the italicized text is my comment as I reflect on my experience. It was June 29th, 2018, when we drove deep into that God-forsaken forest. Dad was behind the wheel, chatting cheerfully with Mom. We followed a slow line of vans and cars, other parents dropping off their kids. Jacob, my little brother, had just driven his Switch to 0 battery and was now excitedly bouncing up and down in his seat as we neared the campsite. I just stared lazily out the window, bored out of my mind, playing with my fidget cube. I was 17 at that time, and Jacob was 11. My parents divorced when I was 11, and they remarried that year after reigniting their lost flame. Looking forward to their second honeymoon, they dropped me and Jacob off at Oak Hill Grove. Much to my dismay, in contrast with Jacob, who was excited, the trees pressed closer as the car pulled up to a wide clearing where a large wooden sign read, "Welcome to Oak Hill Grove," in cheerful, chipped paint. Cars filled the lot, parents and kids spilling out, gathering near the entrance to sign in and collect their camp t-shirts. Oak Hill Grove. What a weird name. Jacob practically bounced with excitement, his backpack swinging wildly. "Come on, Emma. It's gonna be awesome." I crossed my arms, squinting at my surroundings. Nothing but trees as far as the eye can see for miles all around. Yeah, awesome. If you like mosquito bites, bears, drowning, moths, caterpillars, snakes, I blabbered on. Mom shot me a playful glare. "Oh, don't be so dramatic, Emma. You're not gonna die." Yay, yippee. I cheer sarcastically, lacking any semblance of energy. We retrieved our luggage and everything we needed for the next 2 months from the trunk. Approaching the front desk at the entrance, which were just two long wooden tables pushed together, we were met with the smiling faces of two women who appeared to be a couple of years older than me, wearing a red version of the camp t-shirt. "Welcome to Oak Hill Grove. May we please have your names?" The first one, tall, slender, her hair tucked into a neat bun, regarded us with a cheerful expression. "Emma," I said hesitantly. She scribbled it down. "Last name?" "Ashford." I could feel Jacob tugging at my hand, urging me to speed up. He couldn't contain his excitement anymore. He was already done with signing up. They already gave him his shirt. Jacob was fast. I'll give him that. The counselor continued on with the questions. But they became stranger. "How old are you? And when were you born? How much do you weigh? Are you on any medication? Any illnesses we should know about?" Okay, maybe that last one wasn't so bad. But it still didn't lessen the uneasiness I felt after answering the line of seemingly innocent questions. We were both given our t-shirts and bid our parents goodbye. I watched my getaway car drive off into the horizon of trees. Yeah, trees, and more trees surrounding us for miles to come. Unlike Jacob, I was never the outdoorsy type. Jacob tugged on my hand, nearly pulling me off balance. He was that excited. We joined the other campers as the counselors guided us to gather around a wooden stage near the unlit bonfire, which was near the ball field. A man in his mid-50s, I think, stepped atop the stage with a megaphone in hand. He greeted us with a cheerful, "Good morning, campers," and introduced himself as the camp director, followed by the usual speech about how the camp was built on a foundation of education and fun. After the orientation, we were assigned to our respective cabins. Luckily, family members were allowed to bunk together in the same cabin. Now, let me explain just how Hugh, a week before it happened. It was a sports fest that day, different cabins competing. Which one was the best? I watched Jacob and the other kids playing tug of war as the other campers cheered them on and hyping everyone up. I clapped and let out a loud "Woo!" after witnessing my little bro's team win. He ran up to me with a grin on his face. "Did watch see me, Emma? Did you see us win?" "Hell yeah, I did. You sure kicked their asses." I praised him as I wiped the sweat off his back with a towel. He was soaking wet. Then one of the counselors, Julie, walked up to me and told me that she and the head cook needed some help in the kitchen. One of their cooks called in sick, and they needed some extra hands with prepping the food and delivering it to the clubhouse. Some very important guests, members of the country club, just arrived with their families. Julie asked if I wanted to help. I looked over to Jacob. Seeing that he was being watched and supervised by a counselor, I shrugged. Sure, why not? The kitchen was hot and packed. Thankfully, they didn't give me anything too difficult. All I had to do was chop meat and veggies and pack the food into plastic containers. It wasn't glamorous, but it beat standing around doing nothing. Almost an hour later, Mary, the head cook, called me over. "We need to get these boxes to the clubhouse," she said, motioning to a pile of food-filled containers. "Grab a stack and follow me." The other workers followed suit, and so did I. It was a hassle, The clubhouse was on the other side of the lake. We had to circle around, carrying everything ourselves. The narrow, uneven path made it impossible for a car to get through. Finally, after what felt like forever, we made it to the building. Even outside, you could hear the buzz of the people inside. I let out this huge, dramatic sigh of relief as we finally set the food down on the tables. For a second, I thought about just bolting out of there. But then curiosity got the better of me. I mean, how could it not? So, I stayed behind to take it all in. It was definitely a country club. The dining hall looked like something out of a movie. Huge and way too fancy for its own good, with chandeliers that were probably worth more than my entire house. The place was packed with people chatting and laughing like they didn't have a single problem in the world. Some were dressed to the nines in sharp suits and designer dresses, while others went for this weird, casual but still rich look. You know the type, like they're trying to seem low-key, but somehow make it obvious their jeans cost $500. Yup, definitely rich people. A few kids were running around with sticky fingers, wreaking havoc while their parents were too busy mingling with the others. Some of them stopped to stare at me, which was super awkward. I pretended not to notice, but it was hard to ignore the way their wide eyes followed me, like I was some kind of exotic animal. After a few seconds, they scampered back to their parents. Weird. Old, middle-aged, young. I spot a couple who looked to be my age. They were probably dragged here too to attend whatever gaudy business meeting their parents had to attend. I wanted to go up to them and start a conversation, but I felt really out of place. Leaning against a nearby wall, I pulled out my fidget cube and started playing with it, all the while observing the people around me. Something caught my eye. Some of the members were sitting down, flipping through what looked like a menu, but it was a bit thicker, almost resembling a book. But the cover nearly looked like some kind of modern almanac, and they weren't just reading them. They had these old-school wooden ink stamps, and they'd stamp whatever page caught their eye, like they were voting on their dinner. Seriously, that's how they're ordering? It didn't even make sense. Why did they need menus? We'd just put out this massive spread of food. Pork, chicken, beef, shrimp, salad, you name it. They could have just walked up and helped themselves. Were they waiting for something else? I squinted my eyes as I spotted Mr. Marshall collecting envelopes from each guest. It was probably some country club stuff. It does seem like he owned the place too. Thank you all very much. I hope you'll all enjoy your experience, he thanked them. If it's anything like last year, we sure will. One of the ladies laughed while lifting up her glass of wine. After all, Vincent, everyone here paid up the robber. Knows to have some fun. Another chimed in. I couldn't help but roll my eyes, to the point they'd go into the back of my skull. Pompous pricks. All of them. I went back to fiddling with my fidget cube, but my hands slipped, and it clattered to the ground, bouncing a few feet away. Before I could go to retrieve it, an older man picked it up. He examined it for a bit, before looking at me with a smile. He had muddy blonde hair that had gray streaks showing age. Is this your... As soon as I was out of sight of the building, I yanked the menu out of my bag and flipped to a random page. What I saw made my stomach drop, like I'd just fallen off a cliff. Dread. Pure, Bone-deep dread sank its claws into me. There were 100 pages in total. Each one had a photo of a camper, along with a creepy amount of personal info. Height, weight, blood type, bone structure, medical history, and body fat ratio. It was like reading a catalog for... I don't even want to finish that thought. And then I saw it. My page. Photos of me, taken without my consent. One of them was of me sleeping. My freaking medical history. My blood type. My everything. What the fuck? What the fuck? What the fuck? I started flipping through the pages like a maniac, my hands trembling. Each one made my stomach churn, like I'd eaten something rotten. Then I got to the kids section. My heart stopped. Jacob was in it. Jacob, my little brother. This wasn't a camp. This was... I don't even know what this was. A setup? A human trafficking ring? A menu for cannibals? My brain couldn't catch up, and honestly, I didn't want it to. I didn't have time to think. My body moved on autopilot as I bolted back to camp. My legs were on fire. My lungs screamed for air. But I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. When I got to the cabin and saw Jacob sitting there, safe and sound, playing snakes and ladders with some other kids, I almost collapsed in relief. But I didn't. I couldn't afford to. I crouched down, fussing over him like a crazy person. You, okay? You're okay, right? Jacob blinked up at me, confused. Yeah? What's going on? No time. Pack your stuff. Now. My voice was shaking as I threw whatever I could into our bags, shoving the menu into mine like it was radioactive. Regardless, it was still evidence. Jay, listen to me. I knelt down to his level and looked into his eyes as intensely as I could to show that I was serious. This camp isn't safe. We have to leave. Emma, you're scaring me. Why? What's wrong? He looked up at me, eyes wide with fear. There's no time to explain. We have to leave now, I said, with every conviction in my body. Jacob hesitated for a few moments. Then he nodded. Good kid. He grabbed his bag without another word. The sun had already set some time ago. I quickly made my way to the payphone and dialed Mom's number. Thankfully, despite no service out here, the payphone worked fine. I wonder why these things went out of fashion. At the time, I figured it was best to slip away under the cover of darkness. We'd sneak past the counselors, slip through the gate, and once we hit the highway, make a run for it, hitch a ride to town, and head straight to the police station. Mom, please, you have to come pick us up. Something is wrong. Emma, you're not making any sense. Why? What happened? Is Jacob all right? My mother's concerned voice from the other end rang out. Mom, something fucked is going on here to... They took pictures of us sleeping. I'm not making this up. You have to come get us, please. I nearly screamed into the phone, fear and desperation seeping into my voice. Okay. Go get your brother. Don't let anybody see you. I'm gonna call 911, and me and Dad will get to you. I nearly jumped for joy. Thank God. She listened. I could also hear my dad's frantic voice from the other end. Tears welled up in my eyes. Thank you. I love you. Mom, protect your brother. Stay safe, both of you. I love you. And with that, the line disconnected. I quickly made my way back to the cabin. Jacob was still there, thankfully. Let's go. We're leaving. Be sure to stay quiet. He nodded, and we both left the cabin. Before we could leave any further, a sound sliced through the silence, a long, guttural howl that seemed to stretch across the entire forest. We froze. The howl lingered, haunting and primal, sending a shiver crawling up my spine. I turned toward the woods, the shadowy expanse suddenly feeling far too close. First time hearing a wolf since I got here, one of the campers murmured from nearby, startling me. His voice was calm, almost dreamy. Man, that's beautiful, don't you think? Nature's got a way of reminding us who's really in charge. I didn't respond. My focus was on Jacob, whose wide eyes mirrored my own growing unease. Move, I hissed, gripping his arm tighter as I steered us away from the cabin. We barely made it a few steps before another howl split the air, louder this time. Then another, and another. The calls multiplied, overlapping each other. The atmosphere seemed to ripple with their resonance, the forest coming alive with sound. I wasn't the only one. I could see the other campers stop what they were doing. Their attention was on the woods. I could feel the growing fear in the air. Wolves? What the hell? That's got to be hundreds of them. The howls weren't distant anymore. They were closing in, echoing from all directions, surrounding the camp like a T, only for a blood-curdling scream to shatter it. Our attention instantly snapped to the bonfire. My soul briefly left my body at what I saw. Help me! Help me! Georgina shrieked for help as she was being dragged away into the woods by what looked like something out of a Stephen King novel. Human-like, black-furred, with a dog-like face. Her body was drenched in blood. She thrashed around wildly, desperate to escape, flailing around the bloody stumps, which was left of her arms. It moved on all fours as it helped itself on Georgina. Her screams of agony burned permanently into my mind as she was ripped apart. We could only watch in horror. Another scream, and we turned just in time to see a camper hurtling through the air. He crashed into the roof of a cabin, shattering the wood, and when he hit the ground, half of his body was gone. With that, all hell broke loose. The stranger from the car Thanksgiving break was approaching, and I decided to stay on campus alone. Only I wasn't as alone as I thought. What I'm about to tell you may seem wild and imaginative, and to some may be unbelievable, but what I'm about to tell you, it's completely true. Thinking back on it, I kind of wish it was something I imagined in my head, but it wasn't, and to this day it still sticks with me as a defining moment in my life, along with the rest of the strange events that happened. After I first encountered the stranger from the car, fast forward 5 years from the first encounter with this stranger, this intruder who stalked me over a weekend alone while my parents were away. I was now 20 at the time and attending college, residing in a dorm on campus. Thanksgiving was just a few days away, and mostly everyone I knew, including my roommate, were leaving campus. My parents decided to take a cruise for the week of Thanksgiving, and the thought of seeing my grandparents, who I believe still despise me for the holiday, sounded dreadful. So I decided I'd stay on campus and eat Thanksgiving dinner in the cafeteria. Only I expected others to stay and do the stay at least. But much to my surprise, it was only me and our campus security, Officer Jenkins, who would remain on campus for the week, along with a few of the kitchen staff, to make a small Thanksgiving meal for anyone who stayed behind. Thanksgiving break began rather uneventfully. I was used to the hustle and bustle of college life, but now, with most of the students off campus and the grounds practically empty, it felt as if the world had shrunk to just me and the looming shadows stretching across the buildings. I was beginning to feel bored and lonely, and I couldn't call my parents, who were in the middle of international waters at this point. Officer Jenkins, the older security guard with a gruff exterior and an almost paternal sense of vigilance. I was the only person on campus. We'd exchanged small talk in the cafeteria as we ate our solitary Thanksgiving meal, but even his presence couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The same feeling I'd had that weekend 5 years ago when my parents went away for my dad's work trip. It all started on the second night of break. Around 12 p.m., I walked back towards my dorm from the library. For some reason, campus super dark, as all of the security lights are timed to turn off at midnight. I had been in so late to finish my paper that now, for the first time, I realized how dark and isolated it all was. A light breeze whipped up fallen leaves, carrying with it an air crisp with oncoming winter. As I passed the parking lot near the edge of campus, I saw a car that looked like it was out of place. It was parked toward the far end, running, but with its headlights off. At first, I didn't think much of it. There were plenty of empty cars this time of year, but it wasn't common for someone to park and leave their car running. But then, as I continued walking, something made me glance back. Just as I glanced back, I noticed a figure sat in the driver's seat, just behind the wheel, motionless, as if they were waiting. My breath caught in my throat. I began to walk more quickly, telling myself it was nothing. I was just paranoid. But as I reached the stairwell to the dorm, the feeling of eyes on me was unmistakable. I turned my head sharply, catching a glimpse of something behind me. It was the car that had been there but now, without a person behind in the driver's seat. Nothing moved. There was only an empty car, yet a presence I could feel. That crawling sensation of something gave rise to the hair on the back of my neck. I got settled into my dorm and called the main office and got a hold of Officer Jenkins. But after he patrolled the campus, he called me back to let me know, much to my surprise, that the car I had saw was no longer there. By the fourth night, I'd had enough. My mind kept drifting back to that first incident with the man in the car, how his face was indistinguishable in the dark, how the impression of his gaze was always on me though. "Hey, Officer Jenkins," I started, looking around in a somewhat paranoid fashion, as if someone might be listening. "There's something weird going on. I keep seeing this car parked at the same spot at night, and I don't know. It's been creeping me out. I know you said it was gone by the time you checked, but I still have the feeling of being watched at night." Jenkins didn't look up from his binder. "It's just you and me on campus, kid. Everyone else is gone. Could be a late-night driver or someone visiting the place. There's nothing to worry about." His words were supposed to reassure me, but they didn't. I wasn't sure if he was trying to ease my fears or just brushing it off, but I knew what I had seen. That night, the air was heavier, more smothering. I walked in the dark, back from the cafeteria to my dorm, my heart pounding with every step. When I reached the parking lot, the car was again there, waiting for me it seemed, like it had expected me. its headlights beaming, casting eerie shadows across the empty lot. I took a deep breath and told myself that this was it, that this was something that I had to face. This wasn't paranoia. I knew instinctively that there was something not quite right here. I drew closer to the car, my mind racing through all the options. The closer I came, the heavier my sense of foreboding felt. Then I saw it. The figure in the car was seated in the driver's seat, his face obscured by the darkness. It was that same feeling from before, that cold, unnerving presence. I felt frozen, my body unable to react. It wasn't until I heard the faint sound of footsteps behind me that I snapped out of it. I whipped around, panic surging through me as I saw Officer Jenkins walking toward me, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. "You all right, kid?" he asked, his voice calm but laced with a hint of concern. I opened my mouth to say something, but nothing came out. I was too scared to say what I had known all along, the terrifying truth that the stranger wasn't lurking in the shadows. They were following me, watching me, and worse, they had been on campus this whole time. Officer Jenkins stepped forward and laid the beam of his flashlight on the car. The figure was gone. The headlights were off, and the car was silent now, like it had never been there at all. He sighed. "You've been seeing things, I think. It's just us here, and that's the way it's going to be for the rest of the week. Now go on and get some sleep. You're overthinking this." But I knew, deep down, that Officer Jenkins didn't believe me. He didn't see the same things I had. The figure, the car, it was all real, and the stranger wasn't gone. I went back to my dorm that night, but I couldn't shake this feeling that someone was out there, waiting for me. With Officer Jenkins on campus, it no longer felt safe. It wasn't the isolation, but the creeping feeling that somewhere in the dark corners of campus, the stranger from the car was still watching, and this time, I didn't think I'd be able to escape them. It was the last night of Thanksgiving break, and at around 1:30 a.m., I was awakened by a familiar, yet blood-curdling sound. Beep, beep. I had heard it before, years ago, only this time it was different and more insistent, almost frantic. I sat up in bed, my heart racing. I ran to my dorm window and looked out. There it was again. The same car parked in the parking lot, its headlights cutting through the darkness. But this time, the horn was blowing, like he was really laying on it. I felt confused and a little scared as I quickly reached for my phone and dialed the front desk to try to get Officer Jenkins on the line. But as I waited, the line was silent, dead. My pulse quickened. That couldn't be right. The phones had worked fine just hours before. I frustratedly threw the phone down and then bolted from my room toward the main office in hopes Jenkins could assist me. The silence of the halls seemed to elevate every step that I took as being very loud and conspicuous. As I neared the large entryway glass doors, my eyes caught something. A figure stood in the shadowed hallway outside the dorm through the glass, his eyes fixed on mine. It was him, the man from the car. He didn't move, just stared. It was as if his presence froze time. I stepped backward, my breath catching in my throat, but he didn't stop. He slowly reached for the door handle. The panic swelled in. I swung around and ran, my feet pounding against the cold tile floor. I couldn't think straight. My mind was racing with the thought of something terrible about to happen. As I ran down the empty hallways, I could hear his footsteps closely behind me. I burst into my room, clicked the door shut behind me, and dropped onto the floor to try to steady my breathing. The handle shook. My heart stopped. It was him. Rattle, rattle. Bang, bang. This went on for a solid 4 minutes, and then silence. I held my breath and listened. Seconds passed, then minutes. The door didn't open. Was he still out there? Or had he moved on? I didn't hear a sound, so I sat up and walked slowly towards the door of my dorm. I pressed my ear against the door to listen, in hopes of hearing if he was still there. That's when I heard it, the same voice that mutters, as I was pressed behind that Christmas tree box in the closet all those years ago. Only this time it muttered, ever so softly, I will always find you. Just then, for a split second, my heart skipped a beat, and I froze in complete fear. I fell to the floor, hands pressed behind me, to keep myself up. All I could do was stare at the door, not knowing what had just happened. Minutes passed, as just sat in complete silence, staring at the door, when once again I was startled by a stern knock. Knock, knock, knock. You okay in there, kid? Officer Jenkins shouted out. I sat up quickly and opened my dorm door. I'd never been so happy to see Officer Jenkins before in my life, yet there I was, so relieved to see him. I ran into his arms and shouted, I've never been so glad to see you. Was he here? He was trying to get in my dorm. Much to my surprise, Jenkins witnessed him running out of the hallway door and getting into his car, quickly peeling out of the parking lot in panic as he shined his flashlight in his direction. He's gone, kiddo, and the authorities are on the way, he said sternly. The morning slowly rolled in, and after a brief time of filing, was he indeed the same person who had broken into my house all those years ago? Why me? Unfortunately, this would not be my last encounter with a stranger from the car. I've been worried since my realtor wife went to check a listing. The clock had turned 9, and I was beginning to get worried. I had not heard from my wife for a while now. I tried calling her half a dozen times since the afternoon, and the number remained unreachable. This was very unlike her. She has always been accessible by phone, even if she was facing delays at work. I called her friends and parents inquiring if she had stopped by. They answered in the negative. My wife Martha works as a real estate agent. She is an enterprising woman and really dedicated towards her job. So I am not usually surprised when she sometimes loses track of time. She got excited when she spoke about a new house listing in the market earlier today, and she left quickly to check out the place, and I haven't heard from her since. Maybe her phone was low on battery and it switched off on its own, I thought. I opened her laptop to check her appointments. She is usually a stickler for details, always jots down the client's name, time of appointment, and the address of the house they are supposed to visit. I found no new entry on her ledger. This is weird, I thought to myself. For some reason, I thought I should also check her Facebook profile. I clicked on Facebook Marketplace and saw that she had initiated a chat conversation for a house listing in a place that was at least 30 miles away from ours. The building listed looked like one of those old traditional bungalows that still managed to withstand the test of time. Looking at the overgrowth of plants and shrubs on the property, It was clear the place was not very well maintained, but the property was massive, and that alone must have been worth its weight in gold. No wonder Martha was so excited all day. The person on the other end of the chat had provided his phone number and contact address. I tried calling him on it. It was not reachable. I tried reaching out through the chat option, but again, no response. So I noted down the address of the listing on a piece of paper. I waited for another couple of hours. The clock had turned 11 now. I decided to file a complaint at the police station. I was beginning to fear the worst. The cops were sympathetic to my situation. I had brought Martha's laptop with me to the station. I opened it in front of the police superintendent to show the details of the ETOP listing, and it had vanished. I could no longer find it anywhere. This is bizarre. I just saw it half an hour ago, I said, as I noticed the officer beginning to look at me a little suspiciously. I then remembered the piece of paper on which I had written the address. I removed it from my pocket and showed it to him. He decided to go take a look at the property, and I requested if I could tag along. He nodded. I got into the back of the police van while the officer sat in the front. There were 2 other PCs accompanying us. All kinds of thoughts were going through my mind as I sat there in the Jeep. Will I be able to find Martha? Is she safe? Has she been kidnapped? At one point, I began to wonder if she was having an affair behind my back. I immediately felt a little ashamed of myself. We finally reached the address listed on the paper, and I could not spot any bungalow in the vicinity. All I could see was a row of houses, which is very common in the suburban areas. You know, the house with a small garden and a white picket fence. That's all I could see. Just rows and rows of these houses, signifying the average suburban American family. We contacted a few people in the neighborhood to inquire about the bungalow I had seen on the listing, and they were all surprised. They denied its existence. The officer even contacted the local cops in the area, and they all said the address was a mistake. We finally decided to get back to the station. A couple of PCs were giving me strange looks during the drive back. They were probably seeing me as a suspect now. I couldn't even blame them if they did. The officer decided to drop me in front of my home. He probably wanted to check where I lived. He got down from his car and told me, "I will come and check up on you tomorrow. For now, I will get a constable to drive your car back to your place. Don't worry. We will find your wife," he added. I nodded my head in gratitude. I opened the door to my apartment and got inside and looked at the clock. It was 4 in the morning. I felt truly exhausted with all that worrying. I lay down on the bed and immediately fell asleep. It was already 9 in the morning when I finally woke up. I slowly turned to my side to get up from the bed and got the shock of my life. My wife Martha was sitting on an armchair right next to the bed looking at me. I immediately got to my feet and rushed towards her. "Martha, where on earth were you all this while? I was really worried about you," I said. She hugged me tightly and replied back, "I've had quite the day, Jimmy." "Why didn't you wake me up when you came home?" I asked. "And what happened to your phone? I tried to call you all day," I said in an angry tone. "I am sorry, dear. You looked fast asleep and I didn't want to wake you. I think I lost my phone. I have been looking for it everywhere," she replied back. I was still mad at her, but was relieved to see that she was safe. Everything else could wait, I thought. "Did you eat anything?" "Come, let's go have some breakfast," I said. She nodded her head, and we got into the living room to get to the kitchen. Just then, the doorbell started ringing. I opened the door and saw the police officer standing outside. "Good morning, officer. Thank you for coming," I said. "My wife is back home," I added with a warm smile. She was standing right behind me. I just moved a little bit away from the door so that he could see her properly. He looked inside and then looked back at me. "I don't see anybody there other than you," he replied back. Martha then walked towards the entrance and introduced herself. "Hello, sir. I am Martha," she said, and offered to shake his hand. But the man kept staring at me. "Officer, Martha would like to shake your hand," I said to him. I could see his face swelling with anger. "Is this some kind of a sick joke?" he asked me. "You know, I gave you the benefit of the doubt yesterday when you came to the station, but now I think you've been taking me for a ride." He said, "I am wondering if you are even married now, or if you are doing all this because you are starved for attention with nothing better to do," he added. Both Martha and I looked at each other bewildered to see the officer speak this way. He then took out his sidearm and pointed it at me. "Step back," he said. I moved back into the living room with my hands raised. He then started searching one room at a time. He looked at various photos, which included those of our wedding. I even showed him our marriage certificate. Finally, he asked me, "Okay, Jimmy, I believe you." I felt a little relieved. "So what did you do to your wife? Were you bored of your marriage?" he asked. Both Martha and I began to protest. He said, "Shut up. You're coming with me to the station." I got into the back of his police jeep. Martha got in, as well, and sat next to me. She was looking hopelessly upset. She took my hand and held onto it tightly. For the first time, I began. When we reached the station, the same pattern repeated. None of the other cops could spot my wife, and it didn't take long for it to turn into an interrogation. They asked all kinds of details about me and my wife, my professional life, if I was under any sort of medication. The stress was really beginning to build up on me. Just then, the officer received a call, and he answered it. He spoke on the phone for a few minutes. He kept glancing at me every now and then, like he was judging me. That made me feel even more agitated. When he finally finished speaking, he said, "Come with me." I again got into a car with him and was driven out to another location. When we reached the spot, I could see the place abuzz with activity. It was a secluded part of town, but the area had been cordoned off by the police. The press were waiting at a distance. I already began imagining the worst. It looked like a crime scene. The officer escorted me out of the car and walked me to the scene. Martha was following right behind me. As I walked closer, my heart sank, and then reality hit me hard. I could see the mortal remains of my wife. She had been stabbed and bled to death on the floor. I dropped to my knees and was overcome with grief. Tears started flowing down my face, and then I saw Martha kneel down in front of her own body. Realization had finally dawned on her. She looked at me, horror-struck. Suddenly, all the events of the past few hours began to make sense to her. The police officer came to me and said, "Jimmy, stand up. Turn around with your hands behind your back." I did as I was told, and one constable came forward to handcuff me. Martha rose to her feet and started waving her hands in front of the officer, pleading my innocence. but no one could hear her or see her. She burst out into tears as they escorted me into the police van. Now, as their prime suspect, she just stood outside the window, helpless, as the car finally drove away to the station. Birthday. The long finger of time twisted out ahead of me, pointing to an unreachable destination. My legs sluggishly trudged forwards. Plumes of ancient dust, remnants of all who've walked before me, billowed up to greet my lungs with its flavor of bone. In a labored sigh, I marched on, taking in my surroundings. As I picked up the pace, the air was tasteless, aside from the odd drift of dust that fell from the void above, tumbling down like marine snow to the salt and pepper landscape below. It was hard to tell where light was coming from. The graying trees that lined fields ahead of me were perfectly visible, as were the hills beyond that, with a pale cottage defying its endless black backdrop. The sky above, it felt lunar to me. I noticed the silence about an hour into my walk, hopping creaky fences, snapping branches, the pad of my feet against dust-smothered grass. All of that was audible and fine. It was when I started humming, I could feel my throat vibrate and the air leave my lungs, but I heard nothing. I screamed and cried out silently until exhaustion left weeping into my hands. I didn't ask to be here. I didn't want to be here. I didn't know where I was or how I came to be here. Wiping the tears from my face, I took a look around my immediate area. A dull pain in my head throbbed from the screaming. The dust flurried up across the hills in the distance, and I imagined a cool breeze rushing down those hills to whisk me up into the starless sky, carrying me away like a snowflake. Then I heard the humming, my humming, that same mirthful tune I had tried to accompany myself with, looking back upon my lonely footprints and towards the tree line that coiled the field. A cold primal fear gripped my being as the humming grew ever apparent and closer. My blood-curdling screams suddenly erupted, warped, and strained over the sound of the continuous hum. My bones shook into action. My legs tugged against gravity's pull, the blood engine in my chest firing on all cylinders. I ran frantic across the field without looking back, falling dust caressing my frightened skin as it whipped past. "Help!" crept my exhausted pleading voice from across the dead field and into my ear. "Someone please help me." I dove over the fence at the edge of the field and tumbled into the tree line, scrambling through the dust in a panic. I blindly reached for roots to brace my accent to my feet. A silent wince escaped my lungs as my hand fell through the roots like they were made of sand. The dust billowed up as I stumbled, revealing the bones that hid beneath the dust. The musty, damp smell of marrow perforated my sinuses, and reality collapsed in on me. I was running again, the snap and crunch of bone popping beneath my feet, meandering my way through the tree line between the fields. My desperate, mangled screams were muffled by the distance, and all I knew was that I was heading for the hills, for the cottage perched atop them. The thought of four walls, Gav, began to bend and twist it. The sound of healthy wood cracking pierced the dead air like a deep splinter. I hesitated, but then continued to rend the branch from the tree. It did not seem odd to me that there was no green inside, only gray, with branch in hand. I gingerly swept up my trail, leading out of the tree line, and carefully navigated my way over the wooden fence into the field. Now, on the other side, I pressed on, taking precious time to bury my footprints behind me, with my head on a swivel and my ears alert. Anxiety breathed down the back of my neck as I drew closer to the center of the field, the tree line watching silently from all sides, their branches reaching up towards the abyss above. Can anyone hear me? I heard my voice again, so faint and dry, it could have been 3 fields away from me. But the sinking pit in my gut told me otherwise. I abandoned the branch and forced my legs into motion once more, practically dragging my tired body towards the unwelcome embrace of the tree line. Another fence scaled, followed by another and another, putting as much distance behind me as my body would allow. My stomach folded in on itself as I leaned against the next fence. A disjointed black mass was aborted from inside me. It fell limply from my mouth, creating a grotesque, stringy Rorschach in the bone dust. Slack-jawed and panting, the corners of my vision grew darker as I silently observed the mass. It gasped a gentle breath against the dust, so I crushed it with a rock. The hills were closer now, and I fixed my gaze upon the lone cottage to see if I could make out any new details. Its lifeless windows peered back down at me from under their thatch work brim. Daunting as the task was to the energy-sapped husk I called my body, the thought of sitting and waiting to recuperate terrified my being. So I began the slow crawl up. Every fiber of my body screamed in agony as I willed myself further and further, like a lethargic maggot inching its way towards softer flesh. I did stop halfway up to expel a dusty white mucus from my lungs, retching and coughing silently as I watched over the fields. Endless, endless fields of various grays and whites, like a grand patchwork checkerboard, woven together by the tree line that spilled out through the seams. It was peaceful for a moment. Dust bunnies fluttered to the ground around me, and the quiet that blanketed the land swaddled me in a bliss I could not explain. A door slam reverberated down the hill, startling me from my trance, and a hot wind blew the all-too-familiar smell of marrow my way. I pulled myself up hurriedly and limped the rest of the way up the hill, suppressing fear as the hope of salvation surged through my veins. My legs buckled under me as I reached the peak of the hill. The pale cottage greeted me with its glassy stare, and I flung myself forwards through its open maw. I blinked up, my eyes adjusting to the light of the bare-naked interior. Aside from the rustic-looking table and chairs that neatly stood in the center of the room, I could count all 4 walls from where I lay in the threshold of the door, and as my eyes fell upon the furthest wall, they met the gaze of another face. "Took you long enough," the figure bitterly chuckled as he stepped forwards from the wall. A tall, elderly man approached from the corner of the room, his nude skin shedding layers of built-up dust with each step. He reached down to me as I weakly tried and failed to pick myself up off the floor. As his wrinkled, dry skin brushed my face, all I could do was scream, but it only made him laugh. So you're a newbie." He clapped a hand against back and then attempted to lift me further through the door. "I haven't come across one of you in a long time." The small talk wasn't doing much to lift my mood nor my body as I made feeble attempts to wriggle from his grasp. It took him a short while, but he eventually had me propped up on a wooden chair, sat across the table from him. He looked at me with curious amusement. He hadn't tried to hurt me yet, I thought. While peering at the open door, the smell from outside had intruded on our one-sided conversation. The old man slapped his hand down on the table, and my gaze jolted towards him. I know what you're thinking. Who's this crazy guy sitting across from me? Where am I? Where's my voice? Who am I? He began, each question more pressing than the last. I slumped back in my seat and pondered the questions presented. I could guesstimate as to whereabouts my voice might be by now, if it were still following me. But I didn't like the intrusive thought of looking back outside and having some unknown horror lock eyes with me from just beyond the curve of the hill. So I derailed that thought and swiftly moved on to the other question that mattered to me. Who am I? I wrote the question in the dust on the table, and the man blew it all onto my lap. You are someone who is not supposed to be here, but you will be doing us a favor. His chair scraped across the wooden floor as he stood up, and I followed him with my eyes over to the door. He closed it quietly and slid a large deadbolt in place. My world had been reduced to the inky black sky that I could still see through the 2 windows on the face of the cottage. At that moment, I wished that the sinking feeling in my gut would pull me through the floor and away from this place. I struggled to get to my feet, and I had managed to brace myself against the table by the time the man had walked over to me. Sit down and let it happen. His leathery hands pressed down on my shoulders, trying to force me back into my seat. Brittle nails dug into me, but I stood frozen in place by the icy adrenaline that buzzed around my bones. I deserve this. The old man wheezed behind me. Suddenly my body jerked into motion. I threw my left arm up as I sharply turned, my elbow connecting with his jaw. He stumbled back. I heard a dull thud as his head collided with the wall. With all the grace of a newborn lamb, I staggered towards the door, reaching for the deadbolt. A haggard, wet cough spluttered on the other side, and man's eyes flashed white with fear. Your voice? You have one? How? You're a newbie. He pressed himself against the wall, slowly backing away from the door. I watched on with curious amusement as the man eventually curled himself into the fetal position, a deep look of confusion twisting his face. I was looking forward to going back. Dejected, the man fell to his side, and I unbolted the door. Stepping out of the cottage, I surveyed the area. The sky was still void, and the land was still gray. But that did not seem odd to me. The cries from the cottage behind me were almost deceased, and I felt a familiar warmth lay upon my shoulder. Time was stolen from you before you knew time. You will not know suffering. You will not know comfort. Everything you could have been never was, and everything you are now is just. The words chimed in my ear like a forgotten melody, and as I lifted my gaze to meet the speaker, the long finger of time twisted out ahead of me, pointing to an unreachable destination. Last week, I received Henri's final email from 20 years ago. 20 years ago, I sought to master English, my third language. Back then, the internet was still young, and online resources were quite limited, unlike the tsunami of content we enjoy today. After some research, I found a decent online pen pal website. Among the numerous correspondents I've had, One peculiar Englishman, going by the name of Henri C., stood out. Henri was wealthy, possessing numerous residences, luxury cars, you name it. A world completely opposite of mine. Amidst all his possessions, he was missing one thing: a nobody like me who could become his friend, his confidant, to whom he could express his innermost thoughts to. His unwillingness to learn a foreign language made him distinctively unique as well, although it wasn't in the spirit of language sharing. His intriguing character was too captivating to simply ghost. The most fascinating part of his life, by far, was an old manor nested in the heart of a vast forest. The estate, passed down from generation to generation, was shrouded in the strange tale of a curse. It said that every male head of the family had mysteriously disappeared, never to be found again. Despite this, Henri felt an attraction to his heritage and decided to renovate the manor, much against his wife's protests. As the inspection of the old manor progressed, Henri's messages became increasingly unsettling. He wrote of the voice, a call from the depths of the forest that he found himself inexplicably drawn to. Fearing his wife's reaction, I was the only one he confided those occurrences to. With every new message, I urged him to seek professional help. To no avail. Henri was stubborn. He was convinced that those happenings were a figment of his imagination due to stress. But when the time came to turn his attention to the forest, things began to worsen. In my last message, I warned him rather strongly to keep his distance from that forest. My message was left unanswered, as were all subsequent emails. I thought he'd probably had enough of me, so I moved on. Henri had become a memory that would occasionally pop into my head. That was until last week, when I received the following email. I immediately replied, but was answered with an automatic error message, stating that the email address doesn't exist. Here's a copy. Dear Caleb, you're very persistent, but so am I. The mansion's inspection is finally complete. It was in a surprisingly decent shape, a testament to the sturdy craftsmanship of our forebears. Stark contrast to today's buildings, constructed with cheap materials by plonkers who, the next morning, I returned to the cave and ventured inside with a torch. I slowly delved deeper until something caught my eye. A notebook, not any rubbish, thrown away by one of those who hate nature as much as the face they're stuck with for the rest of their lives. No, that notebook was my grandfather's. I picked it up, and whispers filled my mind, the cave pulsing with darkness, akin to a slowly withering heart. Fear gripped me again, and I ran. I fled until I reached the safety of my car. My heart pounded not only from exertion, but from the terror that was consuming me. That day, I was grateful for the British morning sunshine, quite the rarity. Back at the hotel, I directly examined my grandfather's notebook. It was a diary, filled with intriguing entries detailing his life. I was particularly interested in his final entries, and as I read, I realized that his corpse must still reside within that accursed cave. You see, Caleb, when you're affluent, as I am, you rarely sigh. Pardon me if I'm insensitive, but sighing is a solace for the poor, imprisoned in the mundane of life. with no way to escape their own misery. Yet that night, I found myself sighing deeply, over and over again. My fingers ran absent-mindedly through my hair, leaving it disheveled. I looked atrocious. That's what those last entries had done to me. He, too, had returned to the estate, disregarding the warning of his loved ones. Even the warmth of my luxurious hotel room couldn't ward off my creeping unease. Night had yet to fall, but I switched every light on. Darkness, it seemed, had become my greatest foe. In his penultimate entry, he mentions the boulders and his inability to enter without light. The final entry, however, sent chills down my spine, akin to the feverish shivers of hyperpyrexia. I won't paraphrase. Instead, I will transcribe his graceful cursive handwriting in its entirety, but I caution you against reading it in the dark. Transcript. Same day, time unknown. Aided by light, I braved the descent through the narrow passage at the base of the inverted, heart-shaped boulders. The stairs were slick and partially eroded, demanding careful navigation. The deeper I ventured, the louder the voices grew. Some urged caution, while others invited me further into the mouth of the abyss. The passage twisted and turned, growing narrower until my shoulder brushed against the stone wall. Eventually, I reached a platform that led to another tight passage. Despite the warning voices growing louder, I pressed on, drawn by an inexplicable force. The passage narrowed to the point where I had to squeeze through before it widened into a fork. Right being the righteous path, I said goodbye to the left passage. Instead, I should have remembered the Holy Bible. Turn not to the right hand, nor to the left. Remove thy foot from evil. I continued my descent till I reached a long room. I shivered, for it was cold and damp. When I looked to my right, I uttered a cry. A mummified skeleton was seated next to the wall, neighbored by many others. The corpses were going as far as my light's observable universe. As my good friend Georges Lemaitre would have said, every cadaver was the same, seated naked on my right, with a golden plaque on top, hammered into the hard rock. There was something inscribed on them, looking like a long-forgotten language. I ought to have turned back immediately. Retreat from this accursed place. Curiosity killed the cat, and I marched on. After a while, I began to see corpses wearing rudimentary clothes. Slowly, the inscriptions began to make sense. Names from different eras lined the walls. Roman names such as Ianus and Quintus to more contemporary names such as Wilhelmus, Egidius, and further down Richard Nicholas, John Henry, Thomas Edmund William, and many others. Suddenly, I read names that struck a chord. Christopher Charles Cuthbert, my great-grandfather, Andrew, Walter, my grandfather, and Gregory Alexander, my father. Their mummified remains filled me with dread and sorrow. Part of me wished to give them a proper Christian funeral. Then it came to me, surely my name would come next, and surely the mummy below could not be mine, for I was still alive. I looked. My father was the last corpse sitting underneath a plaque, nothing under mine. I read the next name. Lo, Charles Adrian, my son's name, and lo, another name. Could it be my grandson would be called Henry Colton? As I continued down the passage, the letters began to change into an unreadable script. Panic set in. Still, I marched on. Nay, I was running, each step echoing onto the cold walls of this endless room, with nothing but a singular source of light betwixt shadows. With no end in sight, I ran back until I returned to my plaque. I shuddered. If all my ancestors were here and had disappeared, my fate was surely sealed as well. Had I not vanished from the surface of the earth the moment I walked in? But I wasn't dead yet. His last lines were hastily scribbled, ending in a blot of ink. I share this lengthy message with you, Caleb, as I've resolved to explore the cave myself. Since reading this entry, the voices seeping out of that cave have become irresistible. They feel like the serpent in the Garden of Eden, tempting me with the forbidden apple. I cannot resist. Even my dreams showed me that the cave would shut if I entered with others, never to be opened again. I must enter alone, Caleb. My wife has been informed about my intention to explore it tomorrow. And let's admit, if it all was real, imagine the wonder of seeing all my ancestors and the names of my descendants. Another genealogist's dream come true. May you not hear from me again. I wish you a wonderful life. Perhaps one day you could write my epitaph. Just joking. Don't worry. I'll be fine. I will keep you updated very soon. Take care, Henri. That was the last I heard from Henri C. Since reading this email, I feel inexplicably drawn towards England, in need to find Henri. I searched everywhere online, but found nothing about a wealthy British man who disappeared in the early 2000s. However, there was another problem. I experienced a strange tinnitus whenever I searched for him. It was as if Henri's whispers had reached me, even though we are not related. Like him, I began to keep all lights on during the day and can't fall asleep when it's dark. My curtains remain closed because I feel a constant gaze upon me from outside. At times I swore I'd seen a flash of red, like two ruby eyes prowling for me outside. Each time I look, there's nothing. Sometimes I even see the eyes inside my home, but I know I'm alone. Just me and my faithful dog. The hugging boulders haunt my dreams, pointing to a certain location within the British Isles. But what will I do if I find them? I don't know. The urge to go is strong, but I have a good feeling. A feeling that I'll be able to break this curse. The whispers grow louder by the day, and even though I fear what might happen, I can't ignore their call any longer. Last month, I finally went to England. The flight had been a long, long moment of bliss. Maybe it was the altitude, but my tinnitus was cured, and so was my dread. I slept with ease, and when I woke up mid-flight, I questioned whether my experiences had all been a figment of my imagination. I shuddered as I had mentally described my issues the same way as Henri did. Sometimes I wonder how much our correspondence has shaped my person. Upon landing, I took a connecting flight to the north of England, where I presumed Henri's estate was located. A lot of research went into finding the approximate area. Despite this, nowhere did I find any information concerning the name of Henri C., Henri Colton, or any other of his supposed ancestors' names. To facilitate my search, I rented a car. With no time left the first day, I set off to my search. The next, where I drove through a village bordering a dense forest, I knew instantly that it wasn't the one. As the afternoon wore on, I had to return to my hotel. Even without the voices, I wasn't about to take any chance of experiencing the dark. The trepidation I've had back home was not easily forgotten. I needed to spend the night inside my room with every light on, surrounded by rooms filled with other guests. Every day, I went and came back with nothing until the 5th, where snow began to fall. It's also when I nearly swerved into an oncoming vehicle when whispers of woe suddenly filled my ears. I knew the estate was nearby. As I rode on, I noticed a fenced forest. I drove along, and it culminated into a wall, going on and on, until I happened upon a gated road. I stepped out of my car and wondering how I could get over the gate. A large sign with bold capital letters read, "Private property. Trespassers will be prosecuted. Guard dogs on patrol." I supposed that this notice was enough to keep most people out. I surely didn't wish to be mauled. I tried to drive around. Problem was that roads didn't fully encompass the estate. Rather, it was surrounded by hills and farmlands. Left without alternatives, I reverted to the entrance and parked my car on a stable patch of grass. My body wasn't as nimble as it used to be, but nobody saw me clumsily climb over the fence and fall on the thin layer of snow. Once within the property, the manor was a brisk walk from the gravel road. I couldn't believe I'd come to this accursed place. To my surprise, someone was already there because a luxury car was parked near the entrance. A midnight blue Rolls-Royce with a crystal spirit of ecstasy. The car radiated so much luxury, I dared not go near. I hadn't the means to compensate the owner for even a scratch, which got me thinking. I just trespassed on this property. A car meant people. People meant trouble. I was nervous, but my gut told me to ring the bell and deal with the consequences. So I rang. The grandiose D, we sat on the most comfortable chairs I've ever sunk in. I told my story from the edge of an overly long table, overseen by a glistering chandelier. The woman didn't interrupt me once, but her ever-changing expression told me enough. She was gripped by my story, covering her mouth with her hand here, biting the side of her finger there. And that's why I decided to climb the fence and ring the bell, I said, concluding my story. Only the heavy ticks and tocks of a grandfather clock disturbed the silence of the spacious room. The woman dabbed at her eyes with a silken handkerchief. I glanced at the man, but when our eyes met, he scowled, and I immediately looked down. "Thank you," the woman said. She slid her hand inside her Chanel bag and retrieved a photograph. It was a man a little older than me, with a glorious mustache. This was Henri. His real name was Hector Coulter. He was my father. My heart stopped. I had imagined this woman was someone who knew him, but I'd never have thought she'd be his daughter. I'm sorry, I quickly rectified myself. She shook her head. "I should be apologizing," she said. "You've made the journey all this way solely for my father." Despite not having made his acquaintance in person, I didn't really know how to answer that, and I didn't like the awkward silence that followed. I hesitated, but ended up asking her for what I came for. "If it's all right, I would like to enter the cave." She exchanged looks with the other man and cast an apologetical glance at me. It's impossible, she said. We have demolished the place and leveled it with concrete. On top lays a headstone for my father, and another for all my forefathers. Well, why? How? Because he told my mother about this accursed place. Listen, please. She swiftly gestured with her hand as I was about to interrupt. We entered with a group of people, but it only went as far as 30 feet below the ground. Workers have dug again and again. Rock and dirt were all there ever was. Nothing else. Which is why we decided to destroy it and permanently seal it off. I sunk further into my chair. It couldn't be. The voices were still omnipresent. There had to be something below that cave. Or maybe they sealed off the wrong cave. Yes, that was the only logical explanation. Could you lead me there? I asked. She closed her eyes and gave me a long-winded sigh. I vowed never to go near that place ever again. Jonathan will lead you. I thanked her and followed Jonathan, the big bloke, to the forest. How strange it was to see the path, now clear of trees and overgrowth, to walk past refurbished tombs, and to see those Roman or Greek statues in pristine condition. This estate truly had become what Henri, or rather Hector, I should say, had envisioned, except that I'm sure he was imagining wandering through those woods himself, instead of lying dead inside a dank cave. Several times I inserted my fingers into my ears in an attempt to block the noise. Like Hector, the whispers increased the closer we got to the cave. I was both excited and frightened. If it wasn't for the comforting presence of Big Joe, I think I would have bolted. But this big bloke made me feel safe. We arrived at an incline, and although many trees had been felled to open a clearance of sorts, there was a lingering darkness that I couldn't explain. As the woman had said, there was a concrete platform with 2 pseudo-graves on top, but no boulders to be seen. I don't see the boulders, I said. Mrs. Rosalind has had them removed. What? Are you sure? Those must have weighed tons. I'm afraid I am, yes. They had to use explosives and drag the crumbles away. I stared at the clearing. At Hector's grave. It could not be. Can I go near them? I asked. Of course, answered Jonathan. I stepped on the concrete to Hector's grave, or rather, tombstone, since there was no body underneath. Well, not directly, at least. My chest constricted, and a lump formed at the base of my throat. Tears began to well up. The voices, this place, the sudden realization of loss. Never thought a middle-aged man like me, who had no one left but his dog, would shed any more tears in my life. Then, from the middle of Hector's grave, 2 ruby eyes stared at me, with a large, wicked grin underneath them. Laughter, deep as the cavern below, resonated throughout my skull. I was staring agape, transfixed on the eyes. A face took shape. Hector, I whispered, and his face began to age rapidly, maturing into a wrinkly old man until its skin became mummified, brown like leather, and its features hollow with a hole in place of a nose. I fought hard to look away, but could barely move my head half an inch, eyes still staring at his, until his face lashed onto me. I flinched and shielded my head with both arms. When nothing came, I squinted my eyes open. He was gone. I frantically scoured the entire area from where I stood. but found nothing but Jonathan, who was eyeing me suspiciously. Except you began to hear those voices, which obviously means anyone could hear them. Then remove the concrete and let me enter on my own and find out what I came for. Her mouth remained half open while she considered my words. I was certain that deep inside, she also wished to get to the bottom of this, except she knew the risks. She knew by my and her father's account how mad those voices could drive someone. Jonathan, she said, biting on her lower lip, get me a laptop with all due respect. Mrs. Rosalind, I will take a laptop and do what I ask, she asserted. Her expression softened as she added, please. Jonathan bowed and left the room. Rosalind and I sat there, with nothing but the grandfather, clock's ponderous ticks. Jonathan eventually came back with a laptop, and I logged into my account to let Rosalind read the message, after which she wanted to read all of our correspondence. Jonathan also wished to read them, and Rosalind consented, even though the permission was mine to give. Eventually, they had scrolled through it all. Just like my story, no, even more so. She went through a roller coaster of emotions. My father truly was a stubborn man. Rosalind sighed, biting her finger, and you have all my gratitude for trying time and time again to stop his madness. If only he had listened. It would have been a little insensitive to reformulate my request. So instead I asked, did you start to hear any voice? Both shook their heads. I was relieved, yet disappointed. It was no surprise, though, since it took days before I heard anything. Maybe it will be as for me and take some time. Be careful, though. In my case, it seemed as if something lurked in the dark, and that was thousands of miles from here. Yes, I saw that my father warned against darkness, and I will be careful, she said, vacantly looking outside. Suddenly, she stood up. Goodness gracious, have you seen the time? I looked out, and it was obvious that the sun would set soon. I hadn't noticed, because the clouds had darkened the entirety of the day. Will you get to your hotel in time? It was nearly 4. Even speeding, there was no way to arrive before darkness. I gritted my teeth at my own ineptitude to keep track of time. Rosalind gestured something at Jonathan, who nodded back. If you wish, you could stay here for the night, she suggested. My face radiated for a brief instant, until the fresh memory of the tombstone vision came to me like a smack in the face. She must have noticed, as she added, don't worry, we will keep every light within this manor on. There are even garden lights, she pointed at them, to keep our surroundings lit. If something were to approach, we would see it. I furrowed my brows, deeply entangled in doubt, even though I realized I had no other choice if I wanted to avoid the clasps of night. As soon as I accepted, I followed Jonathan to retrieve my car, parked as I left her. Luckily, I had brought a change of clothes, lest I should be in this exact situation. Instead of a luxurious manor, I would have been staying in a family inn, or something cheap. My guest room was as large as my living room back home. It came with a powder room and a bathroom. I let my body drop on the king-sized bed, embellished with pillars on each corner. Am I in a European fairy tale? I wondered. Everything was over the top, yet harmonious and elegant. The combination of old and new blended well. Hallmark that it was designed by someone with good taste. The whispers of woe were now a mere annoyance. My eyelids became heavy as led inside this wondrous bedroom. I tried to keep them open, but they kept closing. What gives? I thought. After all, wasn't I in the safety of light and surrounded by nice people? The moment my eyes shut down, I felt constricted. I opened them, and the ceiling started to crumble. Holes cracked open, spewing mummified cadavers all around me, while I was unable to move, unable to scream, unable to do anything but watch as a fissure grew larger from the corner of the room. Dozens of black hairy legs emerged from it and widened it further apart. A mist of shadow absorbed all the lights. From within, 2 ruby eyes sparkled, and a foul mouth formed with teeth large as tusks. The smell of death made me sick because it spread on my tongue. I could taste their rot. It was closing in, engulfing the corpses in its path. My whole body shivered as the temperature dropped. I wanted to scream for help, but was unable to. In fact, I couldn't even breathe. The dark mist was surrounding me, above me, and light ceased to exist within this void, except for 2 vivid, ruby eyes and movement below them. I could perceive the horror of its mouth, trying to regurgitate something round, a head, my head, mutilated in the most horrible ways, turned inside out. I woke up drenched in sweat, tears flowing from my eyes, heaving. Someone knocked on the door, and I let out a cry of anguish. "Caleb, Caleb, is everything all right?" Rosalind shouted from beyond the door, but I barely noticed. I looked around, still possessed by my nightmare. The door clicked open, and I screeched, until I saw Rosalind followed by Jonathan and 2 other household staff. "What happened? Are you all right?" I swallowed hard. My throat was burning. "Water," I rasped, in a voice that didn't belong to me. One of the staff immediately complied, and I emptied the glass. "Sorry," I said. "Nightmare. Am fine." I actually wasn't fine. I was disoriented, dizzy, and drenched. "Need some time." Rosalind looked upset, with an ounce of pity in her eyes. She asked me again if all was all right, and after making sure that I had all I needed, she asked me to come down for breakfast when I was ready. I looked at the clock, and it was already 8:30 in the morning. I quickly took a shower, during which my nose was completely blocked. I tried to unclog it, and a crimson stream flowed down my nostrils. Even after the shower, it took some time to stop the bleeding. That's when my head began to pounce. I really couldn't catch a break. Not until breakfast. Because I had fallen asleep without eating dinner, I was surprised to see 3 other people inside the manor to cook, serve, and clean the place. Of course there were. This was a giant manor, not some kind of large, middle-class home. I wondered when they arrived, or whether they were always there, simply somewhere else on the property. Or maybe they had rooms in the basement, not unlike those wealthy American mansions. Satiated and happy as I ever was, even though the whispers were disruptive. Rosalind decided it was the best time to speak to me. "I have thought about everything last night," she began. "It was a lot to take in, especially in one day. I wasn't even expecting you in the first place." This innocent remark made me flush. Somehow, I had forgotten that I was an uninvited guest. Maybe I should have shown some restraint, eating that succulent meal. And I came to the conclusion that it would be best to leave that hole alone. She paused, as if waiting for my answer. When it didn't come, she went on. "However, I would like you to stay here for the remainder of your trip, if you wish. First, I want to wait and see whether Jonathan or I will start to hear those voices. Secondly, and most importantly, I think that if you ever came here while Hector had been alive, he would have wanted you to stay here and enjoy the splendor this place has to offer. My jaw dropped to the ground. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Staying just one night in this magnificent, yet cursed, place was the most incredible thing to ever happen to me. I genuinely thought it was a one-off. But no, I was offered to stay here for the next 2 to 3 weeks. I hope this means yes, she said, and I nodded. Very well then. Jonathan will drive you to your hotel and back again with all your belongings. I won't describe the trip in detail, but let me tell you that I don't think any car can top the comfort of a Rolls-Royce. It's incredible how large the gap of comfort is between normal people and those on top of the chain. 2 weeks had passed, and I had only one to stay. Neither Rosalind nor Jonathan had heard the voices, and the whispers inside my head gradually increased, trying to lure me deep inside the woods, imploring me to destroy the concrete. On top of that, the scar on my cheek didn't seem to heal, and it prickled whenever I touched it. Then, one morning, when I was ruminating inside my room, waiting for the dribble to subside and go outside, I decided to check my scar again. I pressed a handkerchief with cold water on it, and blood started to drip down. I looked in the mirror, and I gasped when I noticed the scar had widened. I tried to touch it again, but my arms froze. It was just like at the grave again. But this time, my scar widened and widened until it covered my entire face, and I became Hector. My expression, my eyes, they were mine, but the face wasn't. I had barely time to have a good look when I became older and wrinkled. Seconds later, I had become a mummy, brown and leathery, with holes instead of eyes, but I could still see. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run, yet my body wouldn't move. Blood from the sink below rose on the mirror. Letters began to form, and my heart stopped when I read them. Your end is near. A knock on the door. I turned around. I was able to move again all of a sudden. Looking back at the mirror, the words began to fade, and my face had become somewhat normal. Enter, I said, still staring at the mirror. Rosalind came in and closed the door behind her. She was alone. You told me you need to return next Wednesday. Is that correct? She asked. I nodded. Would it be possible to stay a little longer? What's wrong? She asked. Is that blood on the mirror? Did you write something there? Tell her and she dies. What? I yell. I can't accept that, I said, surprised at the offer. Besides, it's not only about money. I could get fired, and I really like my job. If you could simply... She frowned. I can arrange that. Give me your company and superior's name, and I'll persuade him to let you stay for another month. Another month? I blurted out. I really can't be here that long. There's my job. My dog that's being taken care of by my neighbor. My passport. I'm really sorry, but I have to decline the offer. Please, have a seat, she said, showing me to the round table near the window. I have spoken to a few people about this matter, and I have something in mind. It will take some time, though, which is why I want you to stay here. If it is as I think, I might change my mind about the concrete slab and get it removed. This sudden change of heart was strange to say the least, so I inquired what she had in mind. She looked straight in my eyes. I can't tell yet. I simply want you to extend your stay by a month. If you need help with anything, your visa, money, clothes, ask Jonathan. He is at your service for now. In any other circumstance, I would have jumped from joy. Here and now, however, I became suspicious that something was up, especially after what happened in front of the mirror. Did something bad happen? I asked. No. Trust me. I am not as reckless as my father. All I ask of you is to stay inside this manor. And if you wish to go anywhere, whether to visit or shop, you are free to go with Jonathan. I simply wish you return before night falls and sleep within the safe confines of this manor. Will you do that for me? She seemed sincere and perhaps even concerned for me. I reluctantly agreed, since I really wanted to get to the bottom of this whole ordeal. We chatted a little, and when she was about to leave the room, I was startled by a red flash in her eyes. For a fraction of a second, the door closed, and I was alone in my room, alone with the whispers. I quickly put a veil in front of the mirror and wondered why I saw this flicker, wondering whether that ruby-eyed being had taken possession of Rosalind, as I was sure something must have followed me from the grave. All I can do now is to wait for Rosalind to tell me what's next, and hope it won't be too long, because I know I don't have much longer. Whenever I saw Rosalind, she would tell me to wait for the final piece of the puzzle, as if this whole ordeal was some sort of game. 2 weeks of haunting nightmares later, on a cold morning, Big Joe came knocking on my door. "Mrs. Rosalind is calling for you, sir," he said with reverence. I was taken aback by his sudden change of character and raised a brow. "Are you feeling all right?" I asked. A faint smile graced his face. "I'm not entirely sure that I am, sir," he replied. "Nevertheless, I would like you to follow me so that Mrs. Rosalind can personally share the news with you." I jumped off my bed, feeling 10 years younger. "The news?" I exclaimed. "You should have told me immediately. I've been waiting for nothing else for weeks." We hurried down the stairs into the living room, where Rosalind was standing, wearing a beautiful black dress. The atmosphere felt more formal than usual. She motioned to a chair in front of her. I sat down, staring at the pile of documents and pictures next to her laptop. "Dear, dear Caleb," she said, almost tearing up. "Fate is a strange thing, isn't it? If not fate, perhaps a higher, mischievous power planned this all along. I'm afraid I'm a little lost." She turned on the laptop and showed me a bunch of data and a colorful map. "Do you know what this is?" she asked. I shook my head. She turned the laptop around. A few clicks later, she turned it back to me. "Please, have another look," she said. "What do you see now?" "Well, there's your name, and then there's, mine. Really, I don't..." That's when it hit me. The numbers. The percentage. "No, it can't be." "I'm afraid it is, my dear Caleb," she said. As she grabbed my hand, she added, "My secret half-brother." My chair toppled over on the marble floor with a loud bang as I leaped to my feet. It was as if I'd been hit by a truck. I just couldn't believe my ears. Big Joe promptly set the chair upright while Rosalind invited me to sit down again. But I was too shaken. I needed to calm my nerves first. I have thought long about your story, she went on, about what happened to my ancestors and the curse that follows the male heads of our family. It made no sense that only you were affected when Jonathan and I had read the exact same mail from my late father, which could mean only one thing. No, it can't be. She crossed her arms. Then tell me about your father. He... I hesitated, pacing through the large living room as I started to put two and two together. My father died when I was a baby. Do you have proof? A visit to his grave? Pictures? No, I, I don't recall ever going. I dabbed my brow with a handkerchief, soaking up the beads of sweat that had suddenly appeared. My entire life had been turned on its head. The unnerving ticks and tocks of the grandfather clock pounded inside my head, aggravating my headache. I began, but was immediately interrupted by Rosalind. And you met Hector, Henri at that time, on a website to learn English, correct? Why, yes, but there was no way that... Did you find him? Or did he find you? I tried to recall the exact sequence of events that happened nearly 3 decades ago. I don't remember, I finally admitted. Maybe he found me. Rosalind exchanged a glance with Jonathan. Here's what I believe happened. She smiled, clasping hands together. I could barely concentrate on her words because of the reverbing beats of the clock. My father, our father, had an affair with your mother. You were born, and he knew, but never tried to meet you to preserve the harmony of his own family. Years later, remorse must have driven him to contact you without arising suspicion from my mother. He looked you up, and with the most incredible stroke of luck, found you on a pen pal website, where he interacted with you until his own demise. Haven't you said yourself how strange it was he never wished to learn your language, Caleb? How he just taught you English and made you his confidant, going as far as sending you pictures of his luxurious lifestyle. What kind of wealthy person does that? It makes no sense. My eyes were closed at that point. The ticking and talking grew louder, but I seemed to be the only one able to hear them. Then his final email arrived. She continued, whether it was on purpose or because of the curse, I do not know. What I do know is that you began to feel the same effects as all our forefathers. A sudden attraction to that accursed cavern, hallucinations. These aren't hallucinations, I blurted out in anger, crashing my fist in the grandfather glass panel of the clock. Caleb, Rosalind shrieked. I looked at her terrified face and felt something warm sliding on my hand. I knew what had happened before I turned my head towards the clock. Blood was flowing down my arm. A dark hue gradually expanded through my sleeve. Jonathan rushed toward me, but before he came close, an outburst of rage like I'd never experienced in my life took over me. I yanked my hand out of the broken glass and struck the clock once, twice, thrice, until I heard a loud crack. My first went through the dial, and strangely, I felt no pain. I slowly retracted my hand, blood gashing all over the floor and my clothes, but stopped when I noticed something shining within the clock. Something purple. I carefully inserted my trembling hand back inside and grabbed the object. As soon as it was in my grasps, everything turned white for a moment, and a wave of relief washed over me. Caleb! Caleb! I snapped out of it. Rosalind and Big Joe had grave looks on their faces. I brought my hand in front of me and slowly unfurled my fingers. A jagged knife with a magnificent purple hue, made of glass or obsidian, rested in my palm. But something wasn't right. It took me a few seconds to... My hand, I muttered. My wounds. All the blood was gone. I was completely healed. Blimey, uttered Big Joe. Rosalind was about to say something when the room shook. Thump. What was that? Rosalind stammered, frantically looking outside. Thump. Big Joe hesitantly walked to the window. Thump. He froze. The color in his face disappeared at once. Thump. Still facing the window, he slowly backed away. Thump. 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 What did you see? Rosalind whispered. A monster. Thump. The outside went dark. Even the chandelier lights inside seemed dimmer than usual, as if a thick fog had penetrated within. Mrs. Rosalind, we must go, Big Joe uttered. We must hide in the basement. Then, a sudden ear-piercing shriek, blasting every window, shattering them. Glass was flying everywhere, and Big Joe pushed Rosalind out of the room, but not before she called my name. Caleb, come, quickly. But I didn't, and she was gone with the slam of the door. I was left alone to face whatever was coming at me. My hand gripped the jagged knife tightly, as if I could battle a monster with something that small. Maybe fear had locked my knees in place, preventing me from fleeing. But it didn't matter. I was there, and something was coming. The loud thumps were replaced by a sizzling sound, not unlike gas escaping a sparkless cooking stove. Dark clouds, dripping with heavy black liquid, penetrated through the open windows. Faces of anguish appeared with each drop, and whispers of woe filled the cold room. A beast emerged, blacker than the dark abyss, with two distinct red gems shimmering amidst despair. My entire body trembled, the semblance of a tongue, melting, residue of corpses absorbed, drew closer, and closer, and closer, until it was about to lick. The walk through the forest seemed instantaneous. I finally was back at the cave's entrance, except it wasn't blocked off. I stepped in. There was a pungent smell, and voices that begged me to turn back, but I was ready to confront whatever awaited within. Down, down, down I went, flashlight in hand, until I discovered the endless cavern filled with mummified corpses, just as Hector had, and his father before him. My steps echoed throughout the dank chamber. Every so many steps I snapped my head around, only to be greeted by an endless abyss of darkness. I would stare, wondering if I had heard something, or if my imagination was playing tricks on me. As the corpses began to shift towards a more modern age, my heart began to pound harder. Then I gasped. In front of me was Hector's corpse, sitting there, lifeless, decomposing, just like the others. Hector, I whispered, why didn't you tell me the truth? Were you trying to protect me? I snorted. Ironic, isn't it? To my left was an empty chair. Above it was a plaque with my name on it. And now I had three options. I could keep going, just like Hector's father did. I could turn back and be likely ambushed by that creature and die, or I could simply sit on the chair and see what would happen. So I did. As soon as my bottom touched the chair, the entire room started to shake. Small rock pebbles and dust detached from the ceiling, and even though it was pitch black from where I came, it became even darker. It was as if, instead of being the absence of light, that blackness was a void, devouring not only light, but darkness as well, creating the blackest of black, except for two ruby red eyes shining like a predator with lasers. Thump, 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 thump. It approached, slowly, taking its time. Thump, 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 thump. All became cold. Sounds had ceased to exist. Yes, even my heartbeats were inaudible. Thump, 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 thump. It was right in front of me. Total blackness, shapeless, yet I could see its dark teeth and shimmering eyes. This thing was a monster inside a monster, constantly folding on itself, dripping corpses, or perhaps souls, of the dead, of my ancestors, dripping them only to absorb them back as their silent screams of anguish pierced my own soul. I was seconds away from meeting their fate, quivering from fear, frustrated that I was trapped and about to die, until I remembered the knife. For reasons I still don't understand, instead of piercing the abomination, I surprised myself when I simply thrusted the knife into my own chest, piercing my heart. Maybe I wanted an easy way out, or maybe I felt the need to end it on my own terms. Whatever the reason, I sat there suffering, bleeding profusely as the creature folded. Then the earth shook like never before. A peculiar smell made me smile. Water. I could hear it coming. I could see a tsunami of corpses and waves rapidly approaching, and then all was black, or rather, colorless. Caleb. Yes? I answered the voice, suddenly emerging from everywhere and nowhere at once. Look. I tried to open my eyes, but I had no more eyes. Yet I was able to see. Hector? I muttered. His naked figure, floating into nothing, was backed up by thousands upon thousands of naked men behind him. You have freed us all, he said. Thank you. And sorry. All those men vanished into thin air before I could utter another word. Hector? What happened? Am I dead? Maybe I was. Hector? I had no eyes, yet I cried. I had broken the curse, and now I was no more. How long I stayed in that void of nihility is anyone's guess. At some point, maybe days, maybe years later, it had all turned black. No, not black, I thought. Eigengrau. I opened my eyes and found myself wired to many machines. Row, sailing? My voice was raspy. Caleb! You're awake, she cried, holding my hand. We were so worried. We thought you were dead when we found you at the entrance, completely wet and bloodied. I tried to make sense of everything, but I simply went back to slumber. The next time I woke up, I slowly spoke with Rosalind about what happened. I had been gone for half a year, comatose and dead according to the doctors. It was Rosalind who insisted on keeping me on the machines. She said she felt a connection between us. She knew that deep inside, I was still there. Somewhere. Many tears were shed when I explained the whole story. At a slow pace, due to my vocal cords being unused for so long. You're pregnant? I asked, noticing her huge belly. She smiled. One would be surprised, wouldn't they? She said. Though I'm past the age of bearing children, I have had many of my eggs frozen and stored for a potential future. But because of the curse, I've always been scared. of what would happen if it was a boy. In a few months, she continued, tapping gently on her round belly, Sarah will be part of our family. A girl, I said. Though I knew the curse was lifted, I was relieved to know it wasn't a boy. We spoke for maybe an hour or so about so many things. Rosalind wanted me to stay in Britain, but I don't think I could ever get used to the wealth, the lifestyle, and knowing that I am far away from that accursed place makes me feel safer. So, there it is, the conclusion of my story. I now know who my father was, without ever thinking about searching for him. The curse is lifted, and I am back home. My life has changed, since I am now wheelchair-bound, due to my long comatose state. But somehow, I am happy that things turned how they did. The only thing that bothers me is that, for an instant, I thought I saw a flash of red sparkling in Sarah's eyes as I bid my goodbyes to her and her mother at the airport, but I'm sure it was just a figment of my imagination. Something happened at work that changed my life forever. Kamael, the first time I saw him, everything was so clear, glistening and vibrant behind those cloudy, unfocused lenses. The halls reverberated with the holy sounds of ancient cries. Something about this work drew me to a specific type of soundtrack. The atmosphere begged to be aided by the trilling of angels. I may not be the most traditionally religious person, but death must be revered. To say the morgue is one of the quietest places on earth is to be sleeping during a violent thunderstorm. The morning was filled with the lifting and folding of bodies cramped into tight iron boxes, ready to be broken down into their most basic components. The washing of crimson tides, each space of the gargantuan warehouse, laced with drains, and the sprayer by my side, each day damp and cold, my body covered in rubber, from the wet hum of the machine to the crashing of the blades as bones ground into dust. Each day, numerous bodies transmutated from a form filled with mass to a small bag of fine particles, energy not lost but transformed, physically morphed but unchanged, wooden boxes filled and secured, ready to return home to the living. All the while, the familiar chant of monks and ascetics aiding me with their prayers. There is only one way to handle the dead and dying, with devotion. Perhaps this is why he appeared to me, nearly finished with the daily activities, the river fading as the large squeegee cleared the seemingly endless flow. New boxes packed with those awaiting their final ride. My focus pin pricked on the dangerous metal behemoth that stood before me. The maw, as deep and perilous as any abyss. It didn't take long to learn how many seconds were needed for the gnawing teeth to completely pulverize a skeleton. My counting began once the lever had been switched, mind silent, contemplating the prayer being sung by this most recent congregation. When the seconds dwindled, 34, 35, 36, something interrupted my usual obsessive focus on the work at hand. A glint in his eye, head tilted at an inhuman angle, mouth agape. Life had returned. The sounds around me ceased to exist. Lights shuddered, and the world known to me flittered out of existence. All I could see was those eyes, not just the physicality of his eyeballs locking with mine, the intimate hold of one soul gazing into the depths of another, but the voice behind them, disembodied and brilliant, like a meteor shower appearing in the deepest darkness of midnight. That is when I first heard his voice. The thrum began as a slow vibration, causing me to catch my breath and brace myself against the cremulator, stomach churning. This vibration built into a hum that shook my bones. All my mind and body, as I knew it, began to puddle out onto the floor. My vision falling to a tunnel, with those eyes being the only light, a hope for escape. I stumbled towards the body, reaching out towards the light, grasping for a sense of reality. A faint but deliberate echo ruptured from those cold, unmoving lips. I am, I am, I am, awakened by a shuddering pain, surroundings slowly registering with my conscious mind, damp and shivering against the cold concrete floor, the fluorescent lights twinkling, the ever-present blueness of the room taking over once again. The voice could have only come from one other in the room. My eyes tilted upwards, and I saw him again, lifeless and twisted in that box, gazing towards the heavens, the Gregorian chant resuming. The glint had faded, and only death and gloom now resided in those empty, glossy windows. The chemical composition of my world forever altered by a chance conversation. No speaking, no hearing, only vision and voice. I remember today only because it was yesterday. Yesterday, I woke up with a horrific feeling about the day ahead, a feeling so entrenched and seared to my soul, I hardly remember a time without it. Grade school, maybe. Christmas ages ago. It doesn't matter. I then forced my fleshy husk to sit up and finally stand. I stood staring at nothing in particular, with bone-dry eyes swaying ever so slightly, listening to the familiar whispers between the sheets of drywall till I noticed the sun bleeding through the blinds. Its existence challenged my own and convicted me with shame and haste. I jolted violently, my body moving on its own accord as it began shuffling around the messy maze I'd entombed myself in. I stayed behind, remaining in my head, everything going by in a blur. I was comfortable there, confined to the safety of my skull. I noticed another person and almost panicked, but I realized my body found itself. I was facing a mirror, and I was disgusted, dragged from my skull to bear witness to this corpse of a man. My skin pale and scarred, pulled taut against my bones. My ribs threatened to burst from their thin prison of flesh. My hair unkempt and ragged, sitting lazily above my gaunt, lifeless face. A smile seemed to split open my dry lips, but I certainly wasn't smiling. The mirror was. Once broad and strong shoulders now sit sunken and defeated, my eyes very much the same. A malnourished, disgraceful waste of flesh with half a soul and whatever else crammed in here with me. The man in the mirror isn't the same one I grew up with, you know. This one spoke so softly. Not what you expected to see as a kid. Huh. This one coldly stated as I continued to stare motionless, jumping for a moment as I heard someone laughing in my shower. It doesn't matter. The mirror stares through me. The mirror stares and stares. I don't dare break its gaze until my body finally turns and finishes whatever it was doing. I happily recede back into my thoughtlessness, trying to disregard all I've witnessed. That was until I realized my body was holding something in its hand. My heart hurt. It reminded me it was there and not a part of the blurry mess that surrounded me. It then sank to the depths of my being as I realized I was holding a doorknob. I couldn't go out there. They can't see me like this. The world knew someone else, and it knows I'm not them. It knows. I know it does, and I can't go out there wearing this skin. I can't go out there. My eyes swelled with water. My hands began shaking as my heart palpitates with shame and fear pumping through my veins. What kind of man can't open a door, can't step outside? Hushed murmurs erupted from all around me. Various voices of different people I've never heard before mocked me. Grow a pair, loser. What a fucking pussy. Is this guy joking or what? Just die already. Slit your throat or we will. Nobody can hear you suffering. We've all heard it. We know. The voices sounded like whispers at first, but then suddenly turned into a yelling with this muted agony as if they were being smothered while screaming at me. They swirled around me, rattling my ears with unwavering ruthlessness until all at once they ceased. It was only then that I realized I was slumped against the front door, one hand still awkwardly held onto the doorknob, while the other lay limp at my side. Tears streamed down my face, and my breath was hard to catch up with. It doesn't matter. I finally stood back up and walked hastily to my living room for relief. I grabbed the lighter and began to inhale my thoughts away, washing them down with a bit of alcohol happily, allowing them to swirl into the abyss, leaving me blissfully mindless. From what I've heard, this is far from heaven, but I'm convinced it's as close as I'll ever get, and I'm very thankful for it. That's when I noticed, out of the corner of my eye, she was back in my windows. I quickly threw myself behind my couch, not daring to move, as I knew she'd be frantically peeking around the perimeter of my windows, looking for me, but she'll never find me. I'm always too quick for her. She terrifies me, though. And I know if she ever did lay eyes on me, she'd come right through that glass and take me straight to hell. Or worse, I'd bet my life on it. I'm sure of it. I can't ever let her see me. She cannot get in here. It doesn't matter. After a long while of hiding, I realized the sun was retiring from another grueling day of shining. This meant she'd be gone, and I could move freely in front of windows again, although I'm still cautious and avoid them if I can. I can never be sure if she's gone or not. I was hungry now, so I ate whatever slop I had. I barely tasted anything, and it probably wasn't worth tasting. Right after I finished, I heard a chuckle from under the table I sat at and a scream upstairs. The scream was startling, but the chuckling man under the table wasn't. He was always here and there. He sat cross-legged, smiling at me giddy, like he'd just won an award. His hands moving around constantly, touching different parts of himself and the ground. His clothes were 2 sizes too small, and his bearded face was twisted into a yellow, toothy, crazed grin. I felt his gaze as I cleaned my plate and fork and made my way back to the pane. Really, at first, it was fine. He kept to himself, helped with groceries, and even mowed the lawn once. But things changed quickly. He started bringing people over. Friends, he called them. But each friend was someone new, or someone I simply didn't want in my home. Loud, chain-smoking, drinking until all hours of the night. I tried to talk to him about it once, but he brushed me off. Mom, I'm a grown-ass man. You don't get to tell me who I can and can't have over, he snapped. You never let me have privacy when I was a kid. You always barged in, and look how I turned out. Now you're going to do this to me again?" His words stung. Was it true? Had I been that overbearing? I was strict, but that's only because I was scared. Moving to a new country and trying to keep up with the different culture, trying to raise a son in a world I didn't fully understand. Maybe I was too much on him. Melvin always blamed me for his struggles. I thought it was just an excuse. But what if I really had failed him? I didn't argue after that, but I started locking my bedroom door at night and told him that none of his friends are allowed on my side of the house. But the first time I heard the scream, I froze. I thought I imagined it. So I stood there in the kitchen with soap suds slowly popping on my dishwashing gloves. But the second time, it was unmistakable. A high-pitched, horrified cry coming from Melvin's room. I knocked on his door, heart pounding. "Melvin? Is everything okay?" The screaming stopped immediately. His voice came through the door, calm and irritated. "I'm fine, Mom. Go back to bed." But I heard, "You always think you hear something. It's nothing. You need to relax. And I told you that you need to mind your business. But if one of your friends are hurt, we need to call the ambulance," I persisted, attempting to open the door, but it was locked. "Melvin, open this door now." After too long of a moment waiting there, he finally opened the door with his brows furrowed deeply. "Leave me alone." I pushed past him, but I was shocked to realize nobody was there. "Was it you?" I asked him. "Does it matter? I asked for privacy, and you always push my boundaries, and you wonder why I hated you for so long." His words dug deep, and I apologized for bothering him. But it wouldn't be the last time, because when I left the room, I might have seen a red stain on the carpet near his closet door. Maybe it was from a small cut, or maybe he was hiding something from me. The screaming continued almost every night. Sometimes it was muffled. Other times, it was sharp enough to make me jump. Each time, Melvin had the same excuse. "You're hearing things," he'd say. "You need help." Eventually, he took me to the doctor. "She's been confused," Melvin told the doctor, his voice full of concern. "Hearing things that aren't there. She forgets stuff too." I tried to argue, but the doctor gave me a pitying look. "It could be the early stages of dementia, or even schizophrenia," he said. "Let's start with a mild antipsychotic and see how you feel." The pills made me groggy, dulled my senses, but they didn't stop the screaming. But as the screaming continued, Melvin would just give me more medicine. Sometimes I wondered if I'd overdose just to get rid of the screaming. One night, I'd had enough. The screaming was louder than ever, and I couldn't bear it anymore. I grabbed my keychain and went outside. My hands trembled as I crept around the house. When I reached Melvin's window, I peered inside. My knees nearly buckled. A young girl, maybe 18 years old or younger, was tied to a chair, her face streaked with tears and open wounds. Melvin and his friends surrounded her, laughing and jeering. One of them held a knife. Another held a camera. Melvin was holding her detached foot. I don't remember running back into the house. I don't remember unlocking Melvin's door. All I remember is the girl's glazed over eyes and the way her body was exposed, not without clothes, but with skin dangling off her face and revealing her insides. I woke up in a hospital bed, my wrists strapped down. My body ached. Bruises lined my arms, and there was a bandage on my forehead. Melvin sat beside me, his face pale and tear-streaked. "Mom," he said, his voice trembling, you attacked me. You were screaming about a girl. You tried to hurt yourself. I didn't know what else to do." I stared at him, my throat dry. "The girl," I whispered. "Where is she?" His eyes filled with fresh tears. "There is no girl, Mom. You're sick. You need help." The doctor came in then, kind but firm. "It's important for you to rest," he said. "Your son told us about the trauma you suffered in the past. Sometimes our minds can play tricks on us, especially when we've been through so much." Melvin squeezed my hand before he left. "I love you, Mom," he said. "I hope you come to your senses soon. I'll look after the house while you're getting better." Now I just lay. As I already suspected, she was at a really low point in her life. The place she was working at was already on the verge of permanently closing down, and they had cut her pay by a lot, as they could no longer afford the wage they paid before. When they eventually did close the company down, she stayed with many relatives for months until they got tired of her and ended up abandoning her. My adoptive mother's smile was no longer enough to stop me from becoming teary-eyed. "Then, where is she now? Where has she been all this time?" My voice was quivering. My adoptive mother walked over to me and embraced me into her arms before saying, "I hate to have to tell you, I don't know. When your Uncle Teddy and I went to the kitchen, we heard the front door pry open. She was gone when we went back to the living room. She also left you lying on our sofa." She hugged me tighter, then kissed me on the forehead. "Your mother just wanted you to live a good life. She didn't want you to spend your childhood in a hassle, constantly struggling beside her. So please don't resent her. She would have been a great mother if the circumstances were better." I didn't know how to feel at the moment. I didn't resent my mother at all. I just wanted to see her face and hug her like I was my adoptive mother at that moment. But the following morning, I woke up and saw a note that's been slid beneath the front door. It was from her. She said she was leaving the area for a while, but if we decide to keep you, she'll be back to pay you a visit, or at least see if you're still around. She didn't say when, but she said she'll eventually return for sure. She finished. Although most of what she told me should have made me feel down, that last part cheered me up for the rest of the day. For every year from then on, the fact that I was actually going to see my birth mother later on down the line filled me with unlimited hope. Ever since that day, I always came home after school asking, "Did she come? Is she here?" The answer was always no. Unfortunately, sometimes I didn't want to ask, simply because I was afraid of hearing no, as it would result in me being down again. But I never gave up hope. A few years had passed by, and I was still returning home, asking if my birth mother made the visit. It was always at the back of mind. Often I'd be out and think, I wonder if she's at the house waiting for me. Overall, I often find it hard to recall a single moment in which there was bad tension between my adoptive mother and I. Even during my teenage years, when I was young, she never threw birthday parties or allowed me to have any friends over, though I had many, but she still made sure I was happy when my birthday did come around, celebrating it in ways she knew would leave me satisfied. My birthday celebrations typically consisted of more simple pleasures, along the lines of going to see the most recent superhero movie, or going to the yearly carnival that always seemed to start around my birthday. Other times I'd do some outdoor activities with my uncle, Teddy. Even though I was happy enough with this, I secretly still craved some social interaction with my friends outside of school. I always wondered why she insisted that I avoid this. My Uncle Teddy has been around since I was born, as far as I know. He lived with my adoptive mother and I. He's never been married, and I don't think I've ever seen him go on a date or be with a woman at all. Teddy spent most of his time outside, out in the more wooded areas, either fishing or camping. Sometimes he'd choose a spot out there and set up some camping gear, staying for 2 or 3 nights at a time. This was routine, and he usually did it twice a month. Often when he returned, it was in the middle of the night. When I was younger, I would be awakened by the sound of the door opening downstairs. Then I'd go rushing down to greet and hug him quietly. "Does Teresa know you're up?" he once whispered, giving me a wide grin, knowing what would happen if my adoptive mother caught me wandering the house in the middle of the night. He started taking me with him on his short camping trips when I reached middle school. But of course I couldn't always straddle along with him every time, as he did this year round. It was probably every other month when I went with him, but during the summer, it was more often. I loved Uncle Teddy. Besides my adoptive mother, he was another joy to be around, except he was my blessing to loosen up and break some of the rules my adoptive mother had put in place. Since I wasn't allowed to spend any time with friends, I hung out with Teddy whenever I wanted to have some fun. He allowed me to do many things my stepmother wouldn't from time to time, especially when I got older in my teenage years. Thanks to him, I was frequently sneaking out roaming the woods with him at night. Usually he started a fire for us to sit around. Then we'd just chill and enjoy the stars. It was D. I glanced at the beers in my hand, then back at him again, before popping one of the cans open. He giggled before saying, "You tell, I'll kick your ass." I awakened in our tent one morning, only to find that Uncle Teddy was gone. His sleeping bag was abandoned, opened, and lying amongst the scattered clutter in his area. This was typical. I was usually a later sleeper than he was, and he often liked to start off his mornings fishing by the lake. I usually didn't follow behind him until about an hour after I woke up. But that morning, I decided to choke down some of the canned food we brought and snatch my fishing pole right away. When I reached the lake, Uncle Teddy was nowhere to be seen there either. All I saw was his fishing pole lying at the edge of the lake, along with his water bottle and pail of bait. He also had his chair sitting nearby. After scanning my surroundings in an attempt to spot Uncle Teddy, I finally did. He was standing in front of the hospital that sat many yards away from the lake. I was a bit confused. We've been fishing at this lake for years and have never paid that hospital any mind, despite it being right next to us. I often forget that the hospital exists. What was even more strange was the fact that he was talking to a young woman. I wasn't sure, but it looked like he was flirting. Whatever it was they were discussing seemed to bring a lot of laughter out of both of them. The sight of this caused me to grin. My grin faded when the young woman turned around and revealed her baby bump. I drew my binoculars and zoomed in on the two to confirm what I suspected. Yep, she was pregnant. Several minutes passed by, but Uncle Teddy and the young woman continued to mingle. I anticipated the moment he walked away ready to ask him about her. But every time I glanced in their direction, they were still talking. When he finally did return, I was so caught up in fishing, I didn't notice that he was on his way back. Well, I guess you've decided to be an early bird today. I turned and saw Uncle Teddy heading towards his chair. He picked up his fishing pole and began attaching his bait to the hook. "Who's the chick?" I asked, that same grin from before spreading across my face. There was a pause. I slowly turned my head to face him, only to find him giving me a cold stare. "Now don't get any funny ideas. It's just someone I saw that needed help," Uncle Teddy explained. "When did you see her?" He threw his fishing line out into the water before saying, "It was a couple months ago. I was out here by myself one weekend, and I just so happened to see a woman reaching towards the ground for something. I used my binoculars to get a closer look. It looked like she dropped her purse, along with a few other bags, but she couldn't reach down and grab them because she's pregnant." He reeled in his line, so I ran over and helped her. I picked up her things and walked her to her car. She thanked me, then asked where I came from, because she knew I wasn't in the parking lot at first. I told her that I've been coming out here for years to fish and camp. Then from there, we started talking about one thing after another. We've been talking ever since. Every time I see her walk out of the building, I run over to chat with her. Uncle Teddy finished. My grin turned into a full smile. "You've been talking to her for months?" I said. He glanced at me quickly before gazing out at the lake. "Again, you know how long she's been pregnant?" I asked. "When I first ran into her, she said she was 5 months. As her due date gets closer, it seems like she visits the maternity ward more often. The baby could be born any day or week now." I put my fishing pole down before asking, "Where's the father of the child? Shouldn't that dude be up here supporting her? She hasn't said anything about him yet. I don't even think he's around anymore." Uncle Teddy replied, "So you want to play stepdad?" I joked, starting to giggle. Uncle Teddy couldn't help but to laugh. "Come on. Really, it's nothing. I'm just a stranger keeping her company through her pregnancy. We fished all the way up until the afternoon, leaving with a decent amount of fish to cook throughout the week. When nighttime fell, I started a campfire for us to sit around. As I stared at the flames burning away in front of me, I started thinking about my mother again. "You think she finally came today?" I asked Uncle Teddy out of the blue, breaking the silence between us. He sighed before taking a swig of his cigarette. "Don't worry, Donald. Janice probably just wants to make sure she's together before she comes along. She'll be through here eventually. I promise," Uncle Teddy assured. Hearing this brightened up my mood for the rest of the night, but eventually I had to remind myself. Hearing Uncle Teddy and my adoptive mother constantly say things like this always made me feel better, but the feeling was always temporary. A few hours later, we decided to head back home, as we had already been at the camping spot for 3 days. It was 12 o'clock in the morning when we headed back, and all I thought about on the way home was the possibility of my mother waiting for me upon arrival, although I felt it was unlikely. Unfortunately, I found that I was right. As we pulled into the driveway, there was a woman patiently waiting on the porch, wrapped in a house robe, taking swigs of a lit cigarette. Disappointment showered me when I saw that it was no one other than my adoptive mother. Uncle Teddy glanced over and saw the expression on my face. It was obvious to him what was going on in my mind. He patted me on the shoulder a few times before bringing the truck to a complete stop and cutting the engine. "You want to start taking the equipment down to the basement?" Uncle Teddy asked. I hopped out of the passenger side without answering and grabbed our fishing poles from the back, along with our bags and a few other things. My adoptive mother greeted me with a smile and a kiss before I went into the house. "Had fun?" She playfully pinched my cheek. I nodded my head yes and returned a quick smile. I headed down to the basement as soon as I went in. First thing I did was place our fishing poles on the rack hanging on the wall. As I spun around, I bumped into an old shelf. Then a few books toppled to the floor. I dropped the other things I was holding and kneeled down to pick one of them up. That's when I saw the words, "Beloved Memories," written across the front cover on a piece of masking tape. The book was very thin. It didn't contain a whole lot of pages. There couldn't be more than 10 pages in total. "Beloved Memories," I whispered to myself before opening the book. The first thing I see is 2 large pictures of a couple individuals I couldn't recognize. The one on the left was a young male, while the other on the right was a young female. The female's picture was in black and white. Their ages were written beneath their photos. They were both 18, at least at the time the pictures were taken. I flipped to the next page and saw several smaller pictures of children that were much younger. It took a second for me to notice that all the pictures on the page were of the same child, a little boy. Some were just standard elementary school pictures, while others were pictures of him outside playing or doing other random tasks. I saw a photo of him in a birthday hat, blowing out a candle on a cake. There didn't appear to be any other children in the picture. Then I saw another photo of this mystery male child holding a marshmallow over a campfire. I didn't see anyone else in that picture with him either. As soon as I saw that picture of the boy, as an older child, I flipped back to the first page a few times, only to slowly come to the realization that this little boy was the young 18-year-old on the first page. Soon afterwards, I spotted a photo of him as a newborn. I couldn't even see who it was holding the baby, but there was a date written below the photo, 1987. Confused, I flipped to the next page and saw something that caused me to pause for seconds. There were multiple photos of my adoptive mother and Uncle Teddy with this little boy, holding him, playing around with him, and having the time of their lives. Faces lit up in glee. Uncle Teddy had the little boy sitting in front of him on a four-wheeler. They were both turned towards the camera with wide smiles. The little boy couldn't be more than 6 years old at the time. In another photo, my adoptive mother was lying across a bed while the little boy was crawling on top of her, laughing mischievously. I flipped to the next page. There were photos of a little girl now. All of hers were similar to the young boy's. Lots of elementary school photos, along with baby pictures and child silliness. These pictures were also in black and white. I flipped back to the first page again, only to discover that, of course, the little girl turned out to be the young female I saw when first opening the book. Some of the dates labeled below her pictures were anywhere from the late 60s to early 70s. What had me confused the most was the background of these photos. The surroundings didn't look familiar to me at all. It looked like all this took place in a different house, maybe even a different city and state. This was odd to me because my adoptive mother always told me that they've lived in this house all their lives. Also, they've never mentioned any other children besides me. What was up with this? Flipping through the rest of the book allowed me to see many memories of adolescence. There were several photos of the much older, man-like boy with Uncle Teddy. There were many photos of them around a campfire, laughing and enjoying themselves. I saw a picture of the boy standing in the woods with a shotgun, holding it across his chest. My guess was that you stares until I heard whispering. My adoptive mother and Uncle Teddy were discussing something, but I couldn't make out everything they were saying, as they were speaking so low. I still stopped and quietly eavesdropped anyway. I could have sworn I heard things like, "She still goes to the hospital. How long before the baby?" And, "Any day now." When they saw me come out of the basement, they both stopped whispering, then turned their heads towards me. Uncle Teddy chuckled. "Oh, sorry. I came in talking to your mother and didn't even bother to help," he said, stepping away from my adoptive mother. He paused when he saw me holding the book. His smile faded, and his expression became blank. My adoptive mother's face went from mildly tense to bewildered. "What?" I said, eyeing them both. My adoptive mother forced a smile. "Nothing, sweetie," she said, coming in my direction. "You two just finish unloading the truck." Before she dashed upstairs, she made up, sure to snatch that photo book out of my hands. I walked past Uncle Teddy out the door. The way he eyeballed me on the way out sent shivers down my spine. Over the next month, we were deeper into the spring. The temperature outside was gradually rising, which was great for our camping trips. The weather encouraged Uncle Teddy, and I too visit the spot a few more times than usual during the month. But I started to sense something wasn't right. During that month, I felt some awkward tension in the air hanging out with Uncle Teddy. I just didn't feel comfortable. The vibe wasn't there anymore, as Uncle Teddy's usual laid-back and relaxed aura seemed to be missing. We still talked and laughed like always, but there were more awkward pauses. Sometimes Uncle Teddy zoned out and was so focused on his tasks that I swore he forgot I was there. But then it hit me. I thought about how him and my adoptive mother acted when they saw me come out of the basement with that book. I didn't understand why they were being so funny about some pictures. I mean, I saw the pictures, and there was nothing weird in them. So what was the big deal? There was even a subtle change in my adoptive mother. Her typical affection and emotional warmth started to not feel so genuine. More of her smiles and greetings came off as forced. To me, it was like she was faking it, and now had to try hard to show me the adoptive mother she had on display all my life. To make things even stranger, neither one of them said anything else about the photos until a few weeks after the incident. Uncle Teddy was the one to attempt to clarify things during one of our trips. We were by the lake fishing once again when he randomly brought it up. He told me that the memories I saw in the book was of him and my adoptive mother visiting another family member. The children I saw were their cousins, Bonnie and Blake. "This was before we got you," he said. Now this explanation may seem somewhat reasonable on the surface, and I might have believed it fully if it weren't for how they acted about the whole thing. What was up with the change in their behavior? Why did they stay silent about it for weeks before explaining, like it was something serious they had to prepare for? When I tried to bring up my birth mother, at this moment, he was no longer empathetic like before. The first second I mentioned her, I thought I heard him sigh, as if he was annoyed. The look on his face screamed, "Would you shut up about her? Already? She'll get here when she gets here." Instead, he replied saying, "Donald, I know Janice desperately wants to see you, just as much as you would like to see her, but we need to give her time." At the moment, this slightly frustrated me. I was really getting tired of hearing answers like that. She abandoned me, then ghosted me, for almost 18 years now. What exactly was she waiting on? The Uncle Teddy I knew always came back to life every time he spotted the pregnant woman in front of the hospital. Every time we went fishing, he always grabbed his binoculars and glanced in the direction of the hospital every half hour, looking out for her. He managed to catch her almost every morning we went fishing. As soon as he saw her coming out of those doors, he right away sat his fishing pole on the ground and went dashing across the field towards her. I'd always grab my binoculars and zoom in on the two of them as soon as Uncle Teddy reached her. The woman often came out rubbing her huge baby bump. Then Uncle Teddy usually greeted her with a hug. She happily returned him hugs, seemingly glad to see him. One time he kneeled down and put his ear up to her stomach. He's definitely trying to hook up with this pregnant chick, I mumbled to myself, giggling. Uncle Teddy didn't hesitate to open up to the pregnant woman, unlike his interactions with me as of lately. All of their encounters usually lasted from the 25 minutes to a half hour. He was really getting to know this woman. When he turned and saw me watching him, he started pointing in my direction while mouthing something to her. She started waving at me with a wide smile. I forced a smile of my own and gladly waved back. When Uncle Teddy and I returned home from one of our trips on one particular night, I was unaware of the exciting news I'd get. We were pulling into the driveway, and my adoptive mother was waiting on the porch once again. Then she came rushing over to the passenger side of the truck before we even came to a full stop. Now, with a genuinely happy smile plastered across her face, she opened the door and nearly yanked me out of my seat, right away hugging me while saying, "She came. She came." I knew what she was talking about right away, but I was so stunned by excitement that I barely believed it. What? I stammered. "Is she in the house?" She didn't answer, as she was too busy hyping me up while leading me to the front door. Unfortunately, my mother was not in the house, but she did show up earlier searching for me. Apparently, my mother came a few hours prior, around 6 or 7 o'clock. She's still a beautiful young woman. She's barely aged. My adoptive mother adored. My adoptive mother invited her in, and they talked. She asked her many questions relating to where she's been and what she's been doing all that time. In the middle of their conversation, my adoptive mother got the idea to surprise me with my mother's arrival, so they tried to wait until we returned. Problem was, my mother was currently living at a homeless shelter, and everyone living there was expected to be back at a certain time. Otherwise, they risked losing their spot and being kicked out for the night. Although my mind and soul was racing with joy, the logical part of me was still somewhat active, still homeless, after almost 20 years. As my adoptive mother sat and told me these things, I couldn't help but to internally ask questions. At the same time, I didn't want to risk ruining an exciting moment such as this one. or seem less excited than I really was. I mean, after so many years of yearning for her, I was actually about to see her. I told you, she'll get around to you eventually, Uncle Teddy said, giving me a smirk. Both Uncle Teddy and my adoptive mother suggested that I visit the homeless shelter on the following day to see my mother. After talking to my adoptive mother for hours about this, I went to bed, barely able to sleep as I was too excited. The following morning, I was surprised to see that my adoptive mother and Uncle Teddy were already up, getting prepared to leave. Uncle Teddy was hauling some things from the basement out to his truck, while my adoptive mother was in the closet of her bedroom, rummaging around for God knows what. I thought they were planning on going to the shelter with me, but when I got dressed and told them I was ready when they were, I was surprised to find out they weren't going, at least not right away. Teddy and I have some errands to run, and we'll start by pawning some of this stuff we never use. We'll meet you there. We won't be long, my adoptive mother explained. She told me to take the bus there and advised me to leave a little earlier than them because they were still loading the truck with items. I honestly preferred if we all presented ourselves to my mother at the same time, as I figured it would have been the perfect reunion. But I was too excited to care much or protest. I was finally about to meet my birth mother, and that was all that was on my mind. I walked to the bus station and caught a bus that took a route, including the name of the street I saved in my phone. When I got off the bus, I knew right away which building I should have been heading towards, indicated by the small line of people standing outside. I rushed across the street and barged through the double doors that were located not too far away from the line. Then I made my way down the brightly lit hallway towards the front desk, where there was an older woman standing behind it. I told her I was there to visit a woman named Janice Edwards. She did some searching on her computer, then looked up at me with a blank expression. It doesn't look like there's anyone here with that name. Puzzled, I asked, "You sure? Could you check again?" She did just that, then looked up at me again, shaking her head. The result was the same. I pressured her to check a few more times, but nothing changed. Now confused as all hell, I stepped outside and dialed my adoptive mother's number to see if there was something I did wrong. Maybe I visited the wrong shelter or something. But when I dialed her number, I got no answer. I dialed her number a few more times. Still nothing. So I tried Uncle Teddy. He wasn't answering his phone either. Damn! I yelled in frustration. One of the homeless guys, lying on the sidewalk, turned and looked at me. After standing there for about 20 more minutes and still not being able to reach my adoptive mother or Uncle Teddy, I decided to take a bus to that hospital near the lake where we went fishing. They never did say exactly where else they were going, and being as desperate as I was for answers, I figured maybe they stopped there, or at least in our camping area, for some particular reason. When the bus stopped in front of the hospital, I hopped off and dialed my adoptive mother's number again as I rushed past the building and towards the lake. As I got close to the body of water, it looked like there was something floating at the edge. When my call went to voicemail once, again I hung up and shoved the phone into my pocket. There was something red radiating from whatever it was in the water. That's when my heart started racing. The sudden adrenaline pushed me even closer to the lake. It looked like a person floating. Upon reaching the lake, I almost let out a scream, as it appeared that the thing in the water was exactly what I thought it was, a dead person floating, sideways. It appeared to be a female, judging by the petite body and long hair floating on the surface of the water. The body rolled over a bit, only to reveal a torn and mutilated stomach. This young woman's stomach had been split wide open, allowing many blood vessels and reproductive organs to sprawl amidst the murky red cloud enveloping her body. When I thought I saw an umbilical cord floating amongst the bloody cloud, I realized that this woman had been pregnant. Someone took her baby. I saw her face and thought that this woman looked familiar. As soon as I realized who it was, my canceled scream came to resurface. I drew my cell phone and dialed 911 while running back towards the hospital. I caught everyone's attention the second I ran into the hospital, yelling into my phone, giving the dispatcher on the other end all the details I could gather. The woman behind the desk came running towards me right away, assuming I was hurt and in need of care. Her expression of panic turned to pure fear when I told them what was floating in the lake outside. I heard a few people in the waiting room become alarmed. Then several nurses from the maternity ward came flooding into the area soon afterwards. They all listened to me describe the woman floating in the lake, and within seconds, many of them were able to create a mental picture. Lisa, that name quickly made its way through the small group of nurses. Many of them started sobbing when I told them the baby was torn from her. It was the pregnant woman Uncle Teddy had mingled with for months. According to some of the nurses, her due date was very close, likely weeks away. The fact that she was so close to giving birth after many months of anticipation made the situation much more devastating. The police arrived in no time. As soon as they came, I directed them to the body and ran back into the building. I couldn't lay eyes on that scene again. After having some words with the hospital staff, I was taken back to the police station for questioning. They asked me where my parents were. I told them my guardian was my adoptive mother and that my uncle lived with us. I let them know that I didn't know where they were, as I had constantly been trying to reach them with no luck. One of the detectives dialed my adoptive mother's number. Then he tried reaching Uncle Teddy. Neither one of them answered, even after calling several times. Where did both of you go, I thought. After reaching them by phone had failed, the detectives asked for my address. The one questioning me sent someone else to give my house a visit. Soon, that detective got a call and was informed that my house was on fire. When he got off the phone and told me the news, I broke down. What the hell is going on today? I sobbed. The detective walked over to console me. Despite my emotional state at the moment, he asked me a few more questions. So what brought you to the hospital in the first place? I told him about me going to the homeless shelter to find my biological mother, and how the lady at the desk said she didn't find anyone with the given name in the system. Then I let him know I went to the lake to find my adoptive mother and Uncle Teddy, as I couldn't get an answer from either one of them. He asked what my biological mother's name was. Janice Edwards, I sobbed. He stood up out of his chair and walked out, leaving me in the room alone. I sat there for about an hour, stuck with nothing but my thoughts. The detective came back and peeped through the cracked door every 20 minutes to check on me. He finally returned, opening the door fully with a sigh of disappointment. The look on his face caused my heart to start racing again. As I knew more bad news was coming, we called that homeless shelter you visited, and they indeed had no records of any Janice Edwards staying there. He started, and after a deep search through many databases, it's only rational to conclude that a woman named Janice Edwards in this township never existed. My mom whispers to herself at night when she thinks no one is listening. My family has an odd history of tragedy. At least that's what my grandma always says. The only tragedy I vaguely remember myself is the death of my little sister Holly, or Hall, as I would always call her when we were children. I was 10 at the time, so I don't recall much. I know I was there when it happened. My memory is simply blurry, and I don't put much stock in memories. They can be as deceitful as anything. Thinking back now, I guess it always felt like some part of me was missing growing up. My grandmother would keep on repeating her omens, talking about past family history of accidental deaths, heartache, and the odd murder. It comes in waves. It comes when it wants to, she would ominously say, but we all knew she was superstitious and generally odd. She had always been eccentric, according to my mother, who has a much strained relationship with her. After the death of Hull, they grew even further apart. Grandma kept insisting something about her death wasn't right. She would rant about an evil presence. In her worst moments, she would even go as far as throwing accusations against both me and my mother. Having eventually had enough, my mother cut all ties with her. It was the only way she could start grieving properly, she said. For 12 years, we continued as a family and did our best to move on together in what had always seemed to me a haunted house that was now just a little shorter on love. There were hard times, especially for my mom, but it seemed we were slowly heading in the right direction. That was until my mother started whispering to herself when she thought no one was around. It started a couple of years ago. Initially, my dad and I thought nothing of it. When we caught her, from time to time, she would brush it aside. It's nice to talk to a rational person on occasion, she would chuckle. It honestly didn't seem like any reason to worry. Many people talk to themselves. Then one night, I heard her whispering to herself from inside my mom's bedroom. I should mention that that, and her had been sleeping in separate bedrooms for a while at that point. I'm not a person to intrude on other people's personal space, but I heard her whisper my name. It got my attention. So, there I stood, in the dark upstairs hallway of my parents' house, spying on my mother. I know it might sound weird, but here's the thing. She had been acting strangely for a while now. Distant, almost a bit hostile, toward me, and I had no idea why. We were never any good at actually talking to each other. The less said, the better, could have been the family motto. This felt like an opportunity I had to jump at. She spoke in a low, muffled, and angry whisper. It was extremely hard to hear anything, but here's the gist of what I got. Simon, my name, blank. Blank isn't blank blank whole. Blank leave blank was blank blank evil. Blank blank fault. Suddenly, her voice rose above a whisper into a loud command. Go away. I nearly jumped backward. Then I heard footsteps approaching the door and retreated down the stairs as quickly as I could. I paused at the bottom of the stairs in the main hallway and looked up. I heard my mom open the bedroom door and step out. Had she heard me? Then I saw her face peeking over the stair railing as I looked up. Backlit by the upstairs light, her expression seemed dark and inhuman. If you've ever tried staring at your reflection in the mirror in a darkly lit room, squinting slightly, you'll know what I mean. Features start to change. I stood there, frozen for what seemed like several minutes. I was sure she couldn't see me in the darkness downstairs. I was crouched, hiding, yet it seemed like her eyes were staring straight into mine. I remained motionless, afraid to move, afraid she would notice me. Finally, she retreated into the bedroom. I didn't sleep much that night. All I could think about was the few words I had heard. Why had she been whispering angrily to herself about me and Hall? Who was evil? I wanted to confront her, but how could I? I would have to admit to spying on her. I had to know more, and seeing no other option, I decided to keep spying on her. The only problem was, I couldn't hear her properly from outside the bedroom with the door closed. I needed to be in there. The following nights I would hide in my mom's bedroom, under her bed. It felt wrong. It really did. But I had to know what she was thinking. Confronting her, as I said, was absolutely not an option for several reasons. On the fourth night, it happened. I was lying tugged. Well, trapped really, under the bed when the low, angry, and growling whisper began filling the room. I'm the only one who cares. The only one who ever cared. The whisper crept into the room and seemed to speak from the walls. They all forgot. They never mentioned you. I didn't know until then how terrifying and angry a person can sound while whispering. I couldn't believe this sound came from my mom. Simon did this. There was always something wrong with him. Always something wrong with that kid. I felt an intense fear and unease mixed with sadness. Was this what my mother had always thought of me? I tried to keep myself composed. I couldn't have her discover me now, creeping under the bed. Then she'd think something was wrong with me. It became nearly impossible for me when a second whisper, which I knew wasn't my mom, suddenly appeared. The pitch sounded inhuman, yet familiar. To my horror, I realized what made it familiar. Somewhere in that angry, resentful pitch were traces of Hall's voice. Something must be done about him. He must be punished. I covered my mouth and started sobbing. I couldn't help it. I hoped my mom couldn't hear it. Hearing Hall's voice again speaking those words, I never really believed in ghosts, demons, or any of the things my grandma seemed to believe in. Yet how could I explain this? There was no explanation. I'll make sure he suffers for what he did, Hall. I'll make damn sure. My mom was whispering to my dead sister, and they both seemed to hate me for some reason that completely escaped me. I know I probably wasn't always the best brother or the best son. Heck, there are a lot of things about me I don't like. But did I deserve their hatred? Their anger? Maybe I did. Suddenly, the whispering stopped. I could hear my mom moving about the room. Had she heard my sobbing? For what seemed like agonizing hours, I held my breath until the light was turned on and my mom went to bed. I waited until I was sure she was asleep and crept out from under the bed. As quietly as possible, I opened the door, but just as I was about to close it behind me, I heard my mom. "Simon, is that you?" I was caught. I slowly turned around. She was sitting up in the bed, bathed in darkness. I could barely see her expression, yet it seemed to be judging me. "I'm sorry, Mom. I..." had no words, nothing to explain why I was suddenly standing there. Is everything okay? I shifted back and forth on my feet nervously. Yes, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to disturb you. It's nothing. We can talk about it tomorrow. Brilliant. Then I had time to come up with an excuse. Hopefully, she hadn't seen me crawl out from under her bed. It's late, Simon. You should get some sleep. I nodded. Good night, Mom. I closed the door and instantly felt a panic attack coming on, like the fabric of my soul was being torn into. I didn't get any sleep that night.